Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event of the evening. Presented by Carolina Lightweights. Come get with us. When the action begins in the studio, our referees for tonight's event are Elgato Azul and Carolina Real Streamers. For the viewers in attendance and Facebook and YouTube users around the world, this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Live from the Elgato Azul TV studio in Louisville, Texas, it's time! What's up, slime lovers? Welcome to the Slime Show, baby. Tonight we got one of our regulars, my good buddy Tim, a.k.a. Epic Catfish.
That's the nice hat you got, Chris.
Over there we got Mr. Jamie Dunn, Carolina Lightweights.
What's up, everybody? Welcome in, Tim.
How you doing, Timmy?
Thanks for having me. I'm telling you, it just so happened to work out that I actually had a little bit of time tonight, which is kind of rare.
Yeah, I know you've been working hard. So for the people that don't know you, which I think everybody probably does in here, but tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do besides catfishing.
Oh, besides catfishing?
Yeah.
Well, that's all I really care about. Everything else is just to feed my catfish addiction. So the simple part is that since I was young, I am a success-oriented catfish psycho bent on catching gigantic fish. That's all I've ever liked. That's all I've ever wanted to do. Yes, I love channel cats, and yes, I love flatheads, and yes, I love blues. I mean, but when it really comes down to it, I don't know. My wife calls me fish boy or fish nerd. Everybody in town knows. Oh my gosh, what catfish are you going to bring up next? That's just been the thing. I mean, my parents really weren't fishermen. They tried, but they were terrible at it, and I knew it when I was like 9. I'm like, oh my gosh, my parents are terrible at fishing, because I'm like, this is what I would do. And how, I was formulating my way by 9, and I was a bait catching freak, kind of like your son. I was jumping everywhere and doing everything, and whatever.
At 9, we were already cast netting and running the seining nets. And,
yeah. I bought my first boat before I even had a driver's license, and my parents were awesome enough, because they knew I was such a psycho about fishing. They let me drive it like 30 miles, put that thing in the river with no license, with their truck, and then drive back home. And once I got a license, there were sometimes I didn't come home for a week. And this is before the days of cell phones. They'd be like, what are you going to do? When are you going to be back? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to go to this river. I'm going to the Illinois, and then I'm going to branch off, and I'm going to fish the Fox. And then I'm going to go down, and I might even end up in Southern Illinois. I'll probably be back in 3 or 4 days if the bite's terrible. But if it's good, expect me next Sunday.
Yeah.
What a great life, though. Holy moly.
That's pretty much how I grew up. I bought my first boat when I was 14.
Sweet.
Dad let me buy it. He would let me take it. I pulled it with a green Datsun.
Oh.
It was a 14-foot deep V with a 74 Chrysler, the white Chrysler.
Oh, I remember him well.
You had to pump the hell out of that thing, and it started about half the time. But that was a fun time getting up. My dad would just drop me and my brother off at the lake and let us go.
My first motor, and let me try to remember this, because there's guys that are motor freaks, but all I remember was it said Ted Johnson on it. So you know what it was. It was like a white Evinrude 99 Ted Johnson, and I think it was older than my dad. I'm pretty sure it was. But When you pulled it, it started,
Yeah.
But I hit so many rocks and stumps and everything because, I just had to know. That's why I run a jet today. Seriously. Jets are expensive, and they're expensive to run, but I don't want to be stopped. I want to go in a wood pile. a giant snag, and I want to run, and maybe I want to go fishing for flatheads. Maybe I want to put some baits down in it, on top of it, and with a regular motor, you just can't do it. I don't want to, and jets aren't fast. Let's just face it. Unless you've got an inline jet that is like a water jet ski motor, blah blah blah. Pushing that sea arc, it probably only goes 30 miles an hour. But on a giant river, I can make a straight line because I don't care about wing dikes. I don't care about giant logs. I don't care about nothing. I just go straight, and I don't even have to worry about it. And that's why I still run it today.
I tell you what, man, we've already got a quick question for Tim.
Let me run through here before we ask the question. You ask the question after I'm done. We'll say hello to everybody. We got Shad Daddies first. We got Billy Bever. Welcome in, Billy. We got Chuck Watkins, Mr. Bite Lights. Welcome in, Chuck. We got Rich Segura from Operation Vets with Nets, providing that real therapy. Welcome in, Rich. We got Bruce Journey. Welcome in, Bruce. We got Wabash Nate. Welcome in, buddy. We got
Love it.
Trinity Outdoors. Welcome in, Randall. We got the King of Tennessee, Micah Burkhart. Welcome in, bro.
Micah.
We got Circle Hook Productions. Welcome in, bro. We got Catfish Junkie. Thanks for joining us. We got Bending Tips Catfishing. That's one of our Carolina Lake Weights teammates. We got Corey Whaley. Welcome in, Corey. We got Jonathan Coley. What's up, buddy? Moving on down, we got Pontoon Jody. Oh boy, there it is, epic time.
Jody.
Welcome in, Jody. We got Ryan Smith, one of my Texas anglers. Welcome in, buddy. We got Alex Texas Fishing, another Texas angler. And Monster Mafia Outdoors from Missouri. Welcome in, buddy.
Man, got a good crowd tonight, brother.
Good.
It's going to be a good show tonight. So.
It is.
All right. So,
question, Jamie.
This one right here is from Catfish Junkie, real fast. Tim, over the years, do you think you have got lead poisoning from all the split shot that you have put on your line from biting on it?
let me tell you something. The split shot, I used to hold them in my mouth. I'd be wading in the creek here. I'd hold split shot underneath my tongue. I'm sure I got lead, maybe not lead poisoning, but lead is one of those things that it doesn't make you dumber. It just doesn't make you as smart. It just prevents you from getting as smart as you can get because it's a neuron blocker. Same thing with mercury or whatever. So maybe I would have been too smart to even talk because my dad's kind of like that. I mean, my dad is a freaking genius. He's not a genius about fishing, but I mean, he just can't even hardly react with people. So maybe that lead helped me actually be able to talk to people.
I still do it to this day, Tim. I still bite mine down on my line.
Oh yeah. Well, as long as I don't get the rest of them knocked out by a catfish this season, I'm pretty good.
I'll be able to like them. Split shot that you use these days.
Yeah. Well,
that split shot you showed me.
I wouldn't call it a split shot, but yeah, that freaking thing right there. That.
Jesus.
And that.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's not even close to the biggest. That matter of fact, I've got to pour some. Sean and I have to pour some before donkey season. Because
Jody wants to know, does the missing tooth affect biting the sinkers on?
I just learned how to bite it on the other side.
Mafia says you got to breathe the fumes of the smelter.
I have done that many times. Matter of fact, when I had another house, I poured 600 pounds in one weekend in a basement with no ventilation. So I'm probably going to die within the next month.
Oh,
Matter
man.
of fact, and what it was is a friend of mine gave me a lead mat. And if you know what that is, they used to have workstation mats that were lead because it was a little bit softer, instead of like carpet or whatever for like machinists. And this thing was 5 foot by 5 foot, weighed like 750 pounds. And I didn't have anything to cut it with, and I was young. So I cut that thing with a freaking hatchet, like an East Wing hatchet, cut pieces off of it. I mean, it was so, I'll tell you, even at like 23 years old, it'd make you sore. But, there was no effort, and we're going to talk about effort in a little bit. One of the biggest secrets to catching giant fish is using your head, going to big fish places, and putting out as much effort as you can, and not settling for, this is okay. So, look at you. And how much time we got, Chris? 3 hours?
We've got as much time as we want. Last time we were on
here. Look out now. If we got 3 hours, we're good. I can do the long version. Okay, so as long as we're talking about, and I think that's what this whole thing is about, not just fishing, not a bunch of little channel cats or small blues or little, 30-pound flatheads. This is about giants. So if we're talking about giants, one of the main things that, and I get this question a lot, I really do. So I think it's kind of important. Maybe not to, our crowd, because they're very knowledgeable, but if anybody else is watching this, it's, and the big question I get is, how do you catch all those monsters? Now, that is a super loaded question because it's huge. It's absolutely, the explanation on it is so huge, especially if I look at it from the slant of where I fish, as according to where other people fish. Now, is my area known for big fish? Absolutely is. And that's why I fish that area. I didn't start out there. I didn't grow up on the river. I lived in a small town with a tiny little river that a 4-pound channel cat was huge. And I didn't know any better. I thought I was supposed to fish that. So it's a major tributary of the Illinois River, which a channel cat, and it's got a great channel cat population and a terrible flathead population. I didn't know that they migrated during the pre-spawn at a certain time, so I was always fishing them too late. By June 1, all the big channel cats are out of here. And I used to ride my bike all the way out 3 miles out of town, right down a main highway, and the semis are about blowing you over. And I got rods and reels and everything. There wasn't even any bungee cords. I had to tie it with jute and all this other stuff, and go out to basically where I live now and try to catch giant fish. I just didn't know that there wasn't any giant fish here. Giant fish, which at the time I thought 15 or 20 pounds was gigantic. And I wasn't disappointed in a 3-pound channel cat or a 4-pound or a 5-pound channel cat, but I was fishing it too late because I didn't know the most important thing about tributaries and the wintering situation. I did not know when to fish a tributary and when to forget a tributary. So that was. So when I went to college and I decided that I was going to solve that riddle, because I had solved it somewhat in high school, that if I go earlier, April 25th to maybe even May 25th, I would catch more and bigger fish up my tiny little tributary, which is 70 miles from the mother river. So the mother river of my tributary, since this is it's not a tertiary, this is the main one that clear up here, goes 75, 80 miles, and then empties in the Illinois. Well, there is locals in the Illinois that never spill back out, but usually those are your longer, skinnier fish. You can tell in the spring they've got since they've been here, they have a suntan because it's not a deep river. But as soon as April 15th, 17, 18, 19, if we get the right water, and see, there's all these little stipulations on this baseline. So you got to get the right water to get those fish that are coming from the main river 70 miles away to work their way all the way up here.
You got to have flood. You got to get some.
You got to have the right flow. No flow, no giant fish. And how I knew that those were fish from the mother river is because they were, not only were they robust, like this tall and, 32, 33 inches long, but they were white still. They weren't dark. They weren't that bluish color, into May. But by the time June 1 kicked around, and I didn't even really try to fish for them until, sorry, not June. Yeah, June 1 till after that. So that whole thing, I missed it for years. And I could go on and on about this subject forever. But basically, in the middle part of the country where true wintering happens, I figured out that the movement from their wintering areas, which in the center part of the country where I live, it's true wintering. Where you guys are at, it's not, but it is still a recuperative slowdown in the winter. So migration is going to happen for every degree of longitude or latitude, east and west. It's going to happen 1 week earlier, the initial movement out of their, regular wintering habitat. So if you go center of Illinois, directly below Chicago, go 1 degree east, it happens 2 weeks sooner. Once you get to the East Coast, it happens almost 4 weeks sooner. So same thing.
One of the most probably overlooked indicators that anglers kind of still don't understand.
It's the amount of daylight.
The amount of sunlight throughout the day is one of the biggest factors on seasonal migration.
Yep. And it doesn't, the water temperature almost doesn't matter, because fish with a simple brain stem, they don't have really, let's make a choice. So it's not really water temperature. Water temperature enhances it. It can speed it up a little bit, but that initial movement is always the solar cycle. Always the solar cycle, because they will move at 44 degrees out of those wintering holes. They will move at 60. They'll move at 38 because they can't afford to be they cannot afford to be behind the schedule. Okay. So
and that's a subject that you don't hear a lot of fishermen talking about, Tim.
No, because baseline, because science is you have to regulate, you have to understand things on a baseline. Well, a baseline is something that kind of fits all. Most people are in their own little areas, and they have kind of pseudo arguments with people. They're like, oh, no, spawn doesn't happen until it's like 72 degrees. Well, that's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about that movement. So as a fisherman, if you can understand movement, then you can hedge your bets where fish are going to be in a week or a month. Or you can say, and that's why I said, I was fishing them too late in that situation. So you can fish them too early or too late on a migratory pattern. If you're, now it doesn't necessarily apply too much on lakes like it does on rivers, but it still does.
Quite a bit of it. You'd be surprised, Tim.
Yeah, I know. I'm not surprised. I'm just saying it's way more vivid on a river, because like mine, I don't have a single channel cat that stays in that 80-mile river or where I have access to it.
Yeah.
Or blue cat until it's time, because you got to have the right water and you got to have the right everything. So as a baseline, I don't really start fishing for donkeys, and that's another question I get. When are you going to go fish for giants again? Well, my giants are south of Tennessee. They start moving in October, and yes, there's still a few around, but I'm talking about being able to spend the $400 or $500 it takes, the 2 or 3 days that it takes, and go out there and catch, maybe in a trip, you might catch an 80 and a 70 and a 90 and a 110. And you might catch a whole bunch of 40s and 50s. Now that becomes worth it to me, instead of going like right now into donkey waters where the population, instead of being 2.5%, it's only 0.15%. People still catch 100-pounders where I fish, but it's way more rare than what I do. So I'm playing the odds. I'm not rolling the dice, but I'm going because I understand the movement where I live of where I should be fishing and where I should not be fishing.
That's exactly how I fish lakes, guys. Like, how do
Yeah.
you stay on giants every trip? I'm like,
Mhm.
I move around a lot.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well,
A lot. I'm not. And if I was a tournament angler, I'd have to go fish this lake on this day.
yeah,
You know,
I don't want it. I don't want it.
giant fish production goes down. Now, you can still
Yep.
go catch
Yep.
40s and 20s, and you can still do well. But as far as nailing fish over 50,
Yeah,
you're gonna
I agree.
struggle.
I agree
And
100%.
Tim, you talking about rivers, us fishing a lot of rivers. We fish a lot of lakes, but more rivers than we do lakes. Constantly having to change maybe from one river to another river because it has different characteristics during the time of the year. It changes. Each river is going to show you something different. The fish
It will, but that's not the root equation. Okay. You have to build on your root equation. So the first root equation is if you're going to be really successful with big fish, you have to understand, and I did coin that equation. I'm sure people I'm sure people haven't heard it, but the first one for me, when deciding when I want how to catch monsters, is I have to pay attention to current first. That's the first piece of that puzzle. So, but it has offshoots of that current. But let's just talk about the baseline. Current first, depth second, cover third. Because you can have big fish, especially when you're talking about channel cats, flatheads, and blues. You can have big fish as long as the current is right for that species you're looking for. If the depth is right for the time of year, and let's talk about the offshoots, and then the cover is right. With blues, I throw out cover, except for if I'm on really big bodies of water and I can find something like a sunken ship. When I'm fishing for blues,
Blue cat structure is more important.
Right. And let's talk about the difference between structure, because a lot of people get that confused, and I hear them talk all the time. I'm looking for structure. Well, structure is literally the topography of the river or lake you're talking about. That's structure. Yep. Cover is something that is in the water, a car body, a sunken ship, a barge, a lock, a boat, tree, a boat, anything, a Volkswagen Beetle. It doesn't really matter. So that is in. So that for blues is almost non-existent as far as a necessity. But for flatheads, it's an absolute necessity. So, when you're talking flatheads, first you have to have the right current, because if it's too fast or too slow, they're not there. Big ones aren't. But you can have big flatheads if the current's right and the depth is right, absence of cover. But I put cover second, because if that's the right speed, the right cover, and then the right depth for time of year, then you're on it.
I'd say, though, for really big blues, my biggest ones have all come off of like a secondary feature. So I'm looking for the structure. Okay. Let's say I'm in the river channel.
Yep.
But on that river channel, there's a bend. I like those two things. But what I really love is when there's a stump right on the river channel on that bend. On that stump, caught, 75% of my best fish have come off of that third feature that's by the other two feet.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. How many giant fish do you catch on that stump if it doesn't have current? But you're a lake guy. You're a lake guy. So
there's got to be wind creating current for us to have a really good day.
But what you're doing is you're substituting current for wind and bait fish presence. Now, you notice in my equation, I didn't say anything about bait fish. Nothing. Because I don't care with what I do on the Mississippi or on the Illinois or on the Tennessee. I don't care about the bait fish, because the bait fish are going to intersect. I could try to set up on bait fish that is outside the main current and try to catch 80s, and it's not going to happen on average. Yeah, you're going to get lucky and catch a couple shallow. You're going to get lucky and catch a couple, in a 2 foot flat. But for consistent action, And this is why the baseline is based on the original river that all of the catfish came from. But then we have to tailor it, just like you were saying, Jamie. Then we have to tailor it for where we're fishing. So as long as we understand the root baseline, and then we can add to it, we're always going to be on fish, because it's the major understanding.
Yeah,
It becomes a science. Guys are like, man, how do you just know what to do? It's accumulation of time.
Yeah, it is.
When you're doing things wrong, and then all of a sudden something works, you add that into the memory.
Yeah. And let's talk about this. There's no absolutes in fishing, because there's just hedging your bets.
There's no absolutes. We could just go straight to our first spot,
right,
and start hammering big fish.
Yeah, there's trends, but there's no absolutes. I mean,
there's a lot of variables to compute into the equation. There's more than just the length of the daylight, which is one of the things we talked about.
Yep.
But current, there's the seasonal migration, and then you've got the temperature, the current weather, the previous weather that just came through.
Yep.
And when you factor 20 different things together, that's going to tell you exactly where the best fish are.
All right. So I'm going to describe
and miss a few of those, or you don't take a few of those into consideration. You don't put those into the computer.
Yep.
Your algorithm's screwed up.
Well, and here's the other thing. I'm going to compare my young self to my old self. If I was to bet $100,000 that my young self would lose miserably to me, that's a fact. That is a fact. I would beat my 20-year-old self so bad it would be embarrassing if we were to be in a tournament. Now, my 20-year-old self could throw a cast net 20 freaking feet. He could throw an anchor. He could anchor 55 times. My young self would not even need hardly an hour of sleep in 3 days. But my old man, this old man, would beat up on him so bad, because when we start, my young self didn't understand that basic root equation. So sometimes, most of the time, I was running amok. I didn't if I caught a 40, it was basically a miracle. Now, to catch a 40, I expect it. If I went to the Mississippi, or I went to the Tennessee or whatever, and I was under control of my own boat, and I did all the stuff, had the right bait, I would absolutely expect it within the first hour. And my old self would be guessing. My young self would be guessing so bad that I could be so far off the mark, even though I understood catfish and their nature and their location. I understood a lot of things about them, but not what I know now. And I would be running amok because I would be trying to fish flats. I would be trying to think of where they were going to be instead of where they're at. So my old self, but by the time I was 25, 30, 35, I started, just focusing on that main line. I had to, when I'm fishing for giant blues, I had to throw out my channel cat and flathead mentality. I've said that many times on many videos. So throw out that, figure out that at least in the mother river, the Mississippi River, at least in the places that I fish or have available to me, the deeper and the faster the water, the better.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it's different down past Tennessee, or all the way down to into Louisiana, because I don't get to experience that. But I can pretty much stay with my root equation and contact big fish way better than I can if I get less than 20 foot. If I start guessing where they're going to be.
Catfish Junkie says his biggest blue come off a 7.0 hook. So does hook size matter?
Okay, so Catfish Junkie, out of the 10 fish over 100 pounds that I've caught, and we're not even going to talk about the rest, most of them came from 7 and 8 odd hooks. I'd say probably 7.
That's all you had back then.
That's all you have.
Okay. You were a lot younger man.
Yep.
Okay?
But
now you've got whatever hook you want.
Now I got
let's
14.
be real.
I got something.
Now that you've got the experience,
That's right.
what size hook are you using?
I'm using 10s, 12s, 14s, 16s, and 20s if I could get a hold of it. Because I'm going to throw the biggest bait that I can throw, because I am going to, and here's another thing I've understood now. I've caught more gigantic fish in the last 15 years than in all the years combined because of one of the things. And that's because I can outsize 20s and 30s and 40s with gigantic baits, so that I don't, and I'm sorry guys, but for me, it is wasting time, because giant fish, they sit back. Okay, they kind of sit back. They're not running them up. The 20s and 30s and 40s are running everywhere, gobbling shit. But them big ones, when they eat, when they're ready to eat, they can eat. But if you're going to present something to them, when you can mark them and you want them to come up to that, if you've already done pull it away from them 2 or 3 times, they don't want no more of it. I'm telling you. I can go onto a spot. There's not a single other fish, but I got like a 4-foot fish. And I've marked a single 4-foot fish. And there's only one reason I know that is because I've marked them before and set up on them and caught them. It's interpretation of your sonar. And it doesn't matter if it's the old dot matrix where, it showed up like this and about that thick, or it's, a new one. It used to look like Space Invaders. Dun, 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 so what a 4-foot fish
Bill
is.
says, I'm confused. Tim, why have you switched from a 7/0 hook now to running a 14, 16, 20?
I'll tell you why. Because
makes you change?
Because I want to throw a bigger bait, and I don't want this gap to be filled up. Mm-hmm. A 7/0. I don't even have a 7/0 right here. Matter of fact, I have relegated 7/0s for flathead fishing only, with baits that are 5 to 6 inches long, and that's it.
Now this is bait size.
Yeah.
No, you need a big giant hook for a giant bait.
You do because you can't just skin hook the thing. Otherwise, you're going to fill up your gap. Yeah. And believe it or not, I mean, sometimes it's not going to push, that big donkey bait. If it's filling up this whole area right here, hold on. If it's filling up that whole area right there, it's tough if they're not super going. And I'm telling you, I have missed some giants in the last 10 years because I didn't have big enough hooks. Now I do.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, because we go into it a lot with guys about bait size, hook size, and they say, "Oh yeah, I caught my biggest fish, a 54-pounder, and it was on a 5/0 hook."
Yeah.
And over time, now that you've got a bunch of big fish under your belt, and when you go out, you're targeting big fish. Do you catch more big fish now than you did? Because
absolutely,
you're using a big bait to filter out the smaller ones, correct?
As a matter of fact, I catch more big fish now with way less time involved.
Yeah.
Literally, in the last 3 years, I've spent way less time on the water because now I know where to go at what time of year. Blah, blah, blah. I know what baits to use. I know how, I know I need to keep them fresh and alive, and I'll use them fresh, and I'll use giant baits with the right rods. And it was entertaining when I was younger, 25, 30, but so let's just say if there was an epic catfish that was 23, oh yeah, he'd be entertaining and all. But my old person would be looking at him like, dude, you just missed that whole thing. You went to the wrong area at the wrong time. You did this. You're using too small of baits, and you're reeling in 15s and 20s and all that, and you're stopping in just the stupid spots, And I'm not saying I look at other people like that. I would be looking at me like that because I'm the hardest on myself.
And Tim, one thing I want to hit on real fast before we get too far away. A lot of anglers doesn't pay attention to when they do hook their baits to their hook. You were talking about the bait and the gap and stuff. A lot of anglers mess up and miss a lot of fish just because of
Okay.
that.
Okay. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of deep hooked baits, and we know why they're deep hooked because sometimes they're frozen. You can't just barely, hook a frozen bait. You got to get in there.
Yeah.
You can't just barely hook a shad very much. That's why it's one of the reasons why I prefer the tougher, bigger baits such as carp and big suckers. And it's no secret. I hook them through the nose bridle, probably the toughest part on a sucker. I'll hook them into the rib cage and stuff like that. Yeah, but I'm always looking for less filling that hook gap up, because we all know if them catfish just suck it in and back up, you're done.
That's it.
You worked really, really hard at not only going and locating this giant fish and then throwing it in front of his face, and he finally takes the bait and all he does is back up, and you're like, oh God, he just pulled it down 12 inches real slow and steady and all that stuff, and the rod just popped back up because you just possibly didn't have that hook. And that's another thing. So I've always said I want something that is big enough to go around a grown man's wrist like this. Okay, because that tooth pad on those super giants are so big. Because on the rare occasion it happens that they don't turn and go. The other thing
It's not that rare in a lake, man.
dude, I know it's not that rare. It's not as rare on a river as you think either, because there's reverse current. There's all kinds of things that goes on. So you're throwing it downriver, but yet underneath it's coming to you. So you got a big dumb bow in your line, and yet when they turn, all it's doing is pulling a little bit of line this way, and you got to know when to reel down and then actually set the hook. So I don't
you'll miss every fish.
What's that?
Or you'll miss every fish.
Absolutely. On those days,
I'll be fishing next to someone, Tim. It's the dead of the winter. Let's say we've got no wind. Okay. We've just had a big front come through. There's no wind. The lake's glass. Okay. We're out there. We're catching fish. The guy next to me says, man, we just got picked all day. How'd you do? I'm like, well, we caught 650 pounds of giants.
Yep.
And they're like, we didn't even catch a fish. I'm like,
right.
Those things you thought were pecking were fish. And you got to understand how to catch a fish that's doing that. I mean, experience is key when you're talking about one of those types of bites.
It is. And sometimes, there's certain people online that I try to help, and I see them fishing, and I'm like, I wish I had a chance to teach you what I call the Shaolin hook set. And that's when you see it and they're waiting for the rod to go down, and it never does. But they only have 5 seconds, 6 seconds to do it.
You got to catch.
They got to pick the rod up. They got to pick the rod up, and then they got to feel for it, and they got to reel down a little bit, but not let the fish know he's there.
Yeah.
And then sweep the hook, and you almost point it to him like a shotgun, and you sweep it sideways. And I'm not saying these are all giants. I'm just talking about hooking fish in general, and especially when the water's cold, when it's winter time, when there's a front moved in, and they're just not biting that great. They'll get 20 bites and catch 2 fish. And I'm not saying they would have caught every one, but I did learn that one. Especially, channel cat, big channel cats will teach you that, and it works with big blues and it works for flatheads probably more than the other two. When you need it, because a flathead has a penchant for, just not being all that hungry, but they're still kind of territorial, aggressive, and they'll like bite half a bait. And as soon as there's a little bit of pressure on that, they'll want to back up before they engulf it. So you literally have to pick that rod up, feed it down to them. Like back in the old J-hook days, feed it down to them to where they get it in the mouth and then rear back at a slower, long sweep. It's just a weird thing.
And Tim, a lot of people too. We were talking about this night on our TikTok show when you joined us and stuff. We were talking about the flatheads, how they take their lower part of their mouth right.
Oh,
here.
they will.
They put right up on that ledge right there and stuff.
Yep. Okay, so say you got a drop and it goes like this and it's kind of flat up here. One of the favorite things for him to do, and here's your angle, flathead will come up to this angle and put his bottom lip right there, and this current's going across this, And those fish have no idea it's there. And let's talk about echolocation. All fish have echolocation. Now, it's not like we're talking about dolphins. It's not like we're talking about whales. It's the fact that when a scaly bait fish or even a shad, a soft fin bait fish, goes through the water, they give off vibration signals, and it bounces back to them, and they are aware of it because they have a lateral line. We all know about lateral lines, but that's one of the lateral line is not only for detecting prey, but it's also for detecting danger, because otherwise shad wouldn't even have one. Think about that. Shad have a defined lateral line, but yet they're not predators.
Catfish can detect sound and vibration something 10,000 times stronger than any other freshwater fish.
Absolutely.
Their air bladders connected to their ear, so they can sense a fish that's
sure
just fluttering.
Yes, and there's no mistake that catfish don't have scales, and that they have very slick, very thick slime coats, because and I've kind of equated this to it. I get kind of excited when I think about it, because I actually thought about this about almost 30 years ago, almost before we had stealth technology. So what is stealth technology in an airplane besides the shape plus the coating and the skin so it doesn't reflect? Catfish masters at that. Absolutely. It absorbs and it dissipates. So flatheads are the best. They have the thickest slime coats. They absolutely do, because they prey on primarily live fish, even though blues do, and even though channel cats do. Believe it or not, there's not that much just like dead baits just hanging out, except for certain times of the year. Winter kill, blah blah blah. You get some sort of like weird circumstance. These blues and these channel cats and these flatheads, they're all eating live fish.
Oh yeah.
It's just that flatheads are so much better at it while there is a rod attached to it. Blues are actually very excellent at chomping down on live baits, but for some reason they'll lose track of it if it isn't just like free flowing. And I proved that in my tanks when I take my 1,000-gallon tank and just start whipping the current and throwing pieces of cut bait, and they can eat that like nothing until I like tie a line to it and just kind of feed it to them, and they just lose track of it because they're not like hammering down and turning. All they're doing is sipping, because they're not all that active. It's very interesting. I tried it because I just didn't think it was that prevalent. It's very prevalent.
I catch a lot of blues with live bait all the time. I mean,
yeah.
It's mind blowing. I mean, just as many blues as I do flatheads sometimes.
Yeah. Now that is not the case where I'm at, because I don't throw live baits in true blue giant, blue cat habitat, because sometimes they're just not interested.
And like myself, I love throwing a lot of live bait, and that's the reason why it seems to be that way, because I'm throwing so much live bait than I am cut bait or something.
Tim, one thing it always goes back to is presentation. So how key is presentation?
Yep.
How key is it for you?
Probably more important than almost anything except location.
Yeah,
location first.
Put it in front of the right fish.
That's right. You got to locate them. You got to. As a matter of fact, you got to narrow your time down by knowing the general habitat first. Because you go onto a big river, a big lake, you're going to spend all day and never even look at a fish over 3 foot. You're just not going to. And sometimes before I go live, Sean and I might have looked for 4 hours in great location, because the population just isn't that big, or they're belly to the bottom, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to have to locate fish, figure out what the best situation is, based on knowledge of seeing fish, how they're located, whether they're like this, or whether they're like this, or whether they're just sitting there, or whether they're belly to the bottom. If they're belly to the bottom, I don't care if I mark 6 what I think are giants belly to the bottom. That is not that great of a situation to try to fish if I can mark some, say on a wing dike, 25 foot of water, and they got tail up, head down, head, tail, or the other way like this. If they're tail up, head down, those are feeding fish. And
I've seen you fish
those,
a bunch, and you're like a computer. It's like
yeah,
check, check, check. Are
check,
there
check.
when you watch a lot of other anglers? Who
Yeah.
do you see other guys that know how to compute the algorithm?
I think they do, but I'm not sure that they know how to explain it. I mean, that's just one of the things. I mean, there's guys out there that just flat out know how to catch big fish. They might not know how to explain it. They might not know why they're catching big fish, but they're using their basic instincts. And you know what? Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, the older guys that were actually able to catch some bigger fish back in the day, not maybe very consistently, but they could tell you stories, but they couldn't tell you why they were catching those fish. And it makes it sound like there was more big fish back in those days. There actually wasn't. I mean, some of those guys were really solidly good at it, but you gave them a microphone and said, "Hey, how'd you catch those big fish?" Well, they were in the water. I mean, that's all you get. And trust me, I tried to ask a bunch of them back in the day.
Tim, I get asked all the time. You show up at a new river. Mm-hmm. Tell everybody, a lot of new fishermen and stuff, a lot of people might not know. When you show up at a new place, say like the Great PD River, what's the first thing you're going to do? I mean,
I'm going to look at a map. I don't care if it's on the computer. I don't care if it's on whatever. I'm going to notice what a standard, I'm going to find out what the standard regular flow is, because I need to know if it's lower flow than normal or higher flow than normal. That's one of the most important things. When I used to guide, I'd pull up, I'd look at the forecast, whether it was going to be up, whether it was going to be down. And every once in a while, they just flat out lied. It's supposed to be running at, 21 foot, and it's running at 13 the next day. And my clients would show up from 2 hours away, and I'd go, this ain't right. Today it's not going to be good in this pool, but it's going to take us 40 minutes, and we're going to go 40 minutes to the next pool, and we're going to kick their butts. And they're like, huh? They didn't know. But if we stayed in that pool, I've done that too much. Drop in water, pretty terrible bite. Rise in water, slowly or stable, way better bite. So we did way better the pool above or the pool below than we did on that pool, even though the pool I chose has a better quality fish, but the action was going to be absolutely terrible. You can almost buy a bite in that situation, especially for flatheads. I mean, yeah, you can drum up some, pretty big channel cats on the Mississippi almost no matter what. You just got to go to the fastest current available. But flatheads, when their current turns from on their cover to a nice kind of a fairly brisk walk. Uh-oh, I got problems. When it turns from a brisk walk to nothing, like it's carp and gar water, well, you got problems, because they'll just go find the right current, and they're just sitting miscellaneously out in the main channel. How do you find them? Yeah. So basically, I'm going to look at once again the root equation, and I'm going to move from there. I'm going to figure out what the water level has been, and what it can be, and then I'm going to look at the whole. How that water comes out, what kind of water is coming in a major tributary, what's going on, how far I am from a bigger river into that river. Maybe it's like the Ohio. The only bigger river you've got is what the Ohio dumps in. When the Ohio dumps into the Mississippi, that's a great situation. But if you go way north on Ohio, that's rough to catch a blue over 20 pounds. You might be able to catch more flatheads the farther up you go with the Ohio and stuff like that, as a generic explanation. Everything's got its little idiosyncrasies, but how am I going to know that if I'm a new fisherman on that? I'm not going to know that. But I don't want to poke and hope. I don't want to go in there and go on the map whoop, like this. I just explained that in a video. We were bass fishing on a pool in the Mississippi. We got our asses handed to us because we didn't do any due diligence. All we did was go out there, and we caught a few bass and stuff. We did catch giant pike because I'm kind of a fan of that. But it's really rough. And I tell people all the time, I said, even me, with all this experience and all this knowledge and all this experiment and all this science, I can't come to your pool and just whip butt on a pool I've never fished. I still have to get acclimated to what's going on. I can't just look at a map because a map. Okay, so if there was a virtual map that would show me the current flow and the depths and how things were going through a period of a year, yeah, I'm gonna be pretty close.
So
especially if I can find a sunken part.
For Tim,
What's that?
You got the right flow and you're
Yeah.
in the right area. Once you're in the right area, what are you looking for? What kind of structure? What
am I fishing for? Am I fishing
looking
for giant blues or giant flatheads?
Well, let's go with blues.
Okay, with blues, I'm looking for a nice running main channel of 25 foot or more. 50, 40, even 60 is fine. I'm also looking for ambush points. I'm looking for they can just run that main channel and do what they do, a foot or two off the bottom, and they can move freely. And then I'm looking for, oh boy, I got problems. Hold on.
And a lot of people, Tim, why you doing that is we've talked about before. It's the highways, the major highways that these fish take and travel.
Yep.
You know, you've got to find those points along with all the structures. But certain times of day, these fish are going to take certain highways. And there's going to be ambush points that you can cut them off at and stuff.
Yep. All right, I'm going to have to go to the boys' room here real quick. I'll be right back.
All right.
So just you know, talk about it with your
There you go. But yeah, I mean, guys, like I said, you find these major highways, man. You going up under the water, you know they're gonna have cutoffs. But if you don't pay attention, certain times of days you can move in front of these fish as they move and cut them off and get in front of them. And that's where you're going to end up catching a lot of these fish. But not only that, is knowing how to learn that time. You know, you could go there that morning, might not do nothing. You could go midday and be like nothing. But as soon as you show up in that afternoon, you could be tearing them up on that highway because that's the time that they're going to come through that location. But if you find you some good structure just off of that main highway that they're traveling and you locate the time that they're traveling, you're going to do good on them. So like I said, morning times in certain locations might not do nothing. After or midday, you might not do nothing. But that afternoon, you could find the fish coming through that area, and that, you know, just learning that.
And so, in summary of what you're saying is, if you can find a decent travel zone of the right depth plus the right current, and then you have ambush spots where they can duck in and look. And let's talk about this. There's a lot of places don't have wing dikes. Okay, the Mississippi does. It was invented by the Corps of Engineers, so it's like this big wide rock dike that comes out from the bank, and it goes in and it channels water towards the inside down the main channel to keep it from silting in. There's 100 wing dikes in a 30-mile pool or a 24-mile pool, but only 3 of them are good. Why is that? Because some of them don't have the right current, right depth, and right cover. Some of them are fantastic. Some of them are almost perennial, year-round, great situations. But usually it's only 1 or 2 in a pool, 3 or 4 consistently. Some of them will be occasionally good. So there's something about it. Now, I can't tell you the difference between 2 wing dikes that are very similar, but yet one yields fish all the time and the other one doesn't, because, you know, I can't, but it's true. It's absolutely true. There's little things. Maybe it's not holding deep water bait fish. Maybe it doesn't have the right current that's flowing over them that they feel real good. We all like a good breeze, right? Catfish love a good current if they can get it, the right current. Too windy and we hate it. It doesn't feel good to our skin. Right?
And that's why a lot of people on the river, certain times when that tide, when it slows down, when it's going fast, you're going to find that bite being a little bit different at certain times during that tide, that 6 hour tide difference right there.
Yep.
You know, a lot of people be like, well, it's always good at the lower part of the tide, or it's, a lot of people don't understand that whole scenario with the tides.
Here's the other thing, Chris and Jeremy, I should say. Everybody watching, don't get the idea that I always know, because I don't. I think I've got it figured out. I've looked at what happened 3 days ago. I looked at what's happening now, and I look at the forecast as far as water flow. I look at where we're at in the season. I look at where we're going. Sean and I get all excited, and I start talking about patterns. This is where we're going to do pattern A. This is what we're going to do pattern B. And somewhere it's going to be awesome. Sometimes we get all the way down to pattern D, and it makes no sense why none of it happens. Sometimes we get there and we can't even mark a fish. It looks like the surface of the moon, and there's no rhyme or reason that we know based on experience or science, and we're just kind of befuddled. Next is effort. Because when all else fails, move. Look. Fire baits, and sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes you can't mark a fish. And I don't even like to stop on an area unless I can mark a fish at least 3 3/4 foot long, or 4 foot, or 5 foot. I don't even like to do it. But sometimes I just got to go, yeah, we're going to do the best we can with the situation we got. And sometimes I just shut the camera off. Boop, we're out. I mean, because I've seen it.
And that's where a lot of people give up on trying to use their grasp and find the fish. They just go and throw in dead water.
Yeah.
And, it's just.
No.
They're not there.
And I have a look. And, I'm not saying people haven't caught big fish in dead water. But my thing is, if it's carp and gar water, I don't even want to fish it. Sorry, but I just don't. I'd rather be somewhere else than throw in dead water. And that doesn't matter if I was fishing off the bank. It doesn't matter if I'm in the boat. I mean, that's it. And when all else fails, I go to the current. I just go to the fastest, dumbest, most horrible current you can shake a stick at that just gut it out. You just do. And usually that'll at least give me a shot at a big fish, even though the bite's terrible. It might take me 10 hours to do it, but there's going to be one fish that's going to do it. Now it kind of affects, it's hard to get a gauge of what I do just by watching our live shows or videos, because my signal is so terrible. I mean, it's so terrible. It just eliminates so many spots. So y'all end up seeing me in just this general area, because as soon as I get around the bend, there goes the signal. But we do a few videos that aren't in those locations, but Sean and I have grown to really kind of like talking to people while we're doing our fishing.
Yeah.
But
when I've seen y'all fish, you go find the fish that you want to catch.
Yeah. And it does make it hard for our viewers, because, I mean, even though we spent 3 hours looking before, or 4 hours, and I've rated spots 1 to 10, sometimes those aren't panning out, and we got to go look for fish. And so right in the middle of the live show, it might be another hour, buzzing around at night.
You're going to look for fish, Tim.
Yeah.
Do you go find, way I fish is if I know that I'm going to go fish with people and I got a chance to go look, I go find 3 or 4 groups, and then I pick the best group out.
Yes. I try to find 10
in it. If I mark a group that has 3 or 4 giants in it, I'm like,
I'm on it right now.
I'm going.
Yep. Right now.
And if I don't see one with giant fish, I'm going to keep looking until I see one with good fish. And sometimes you don't ever find one with the fish that you want, and you just got to pick the best one out of the 4 that you found.
And you got to look at the circumstance, because when you can't mark fish, you just got to go with the best scenario. And every once in a while, I have not been able to mark fish. I fished the best scenario, and here comes the giant. Here comes the 80. Here comes the 90. Here comes the 111. I mean, sometimes I cannot mark blues because they're moving so fast that I cannot trust being able to anchor because they're not interested in eating. They're actually moving. So I got to go to a neck down, a narrow down, or something that is going to stop them for a period of time. So I need to find where the main river is going like this and it bumps up hard, or at least in a boat length or 2 or 3 boat lengths, not in 100 yards, because that I can't. It doesn't corral fish. So I'm looking for an ambush spot, and it doesn't matter if I'm doing it for flatheads or giant blues. Probably more with giant blues than flatheads. Flatheads tend to homebody a little bit. They don't move as much as a person would think. Everybody thinks as soon as flatheads, as soon as it gets dark, flatheads are going to move upstream. No, they can move sideways. They can move downstream. They can move towards there's 100 different ways that they aren't necessarily going to find your baits. So I try to ambush flatheads where they live during the day, because a lot of them stay home. They don't really move. They'll move, but the odds are if I know that I'm fishing the right cover, the right structure, the right current, that flatheads are still going to be there at midnight.
That's it. I'm going to ask Tim real fast, ask about the 3-day bite.
Oh, the 3-day bite. It's something that everybody who's been paying attention to YouTube and TikTok have seen in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So when the East Coast rivers have terrible bites, and the Mississippi's got terrible bites, and the Tennessee's got terrible bites, and the Mississippi's got terrible bites, for some reason it all coincides, and then all of a sudden it'll start to pick up. And then it'll get really good, and then it'll fall off, and then by the 3rd day, it'll be terrible again. And it almost doesn't matter what it does. It does matter what the barometer is. It does matter what the circumstances is. It does matter what everything's going. But I've noticed this for years, where I could go for 12 days, spend the night on one of them sandy ass islands for 12 days, barefoot, running my boat, 25 years old, whatever, maybe I got a hammock, maybe I got a tent. I'd get there and the bite maybe was terrible, and I'd have 1 or 2, maybe 3 days of a great bite, and it would fall off again. Terrible bite for 3 days, couldn't hardly mark a decent fish. And so that 3-day bite cycle, I just thought I attributed it to maybe I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe the Mississippi River is different. But now I started to see it across the country for some reason. Is it moon phase? Probably not totally moon phase. Is it solar whatever? Is it barometer? Is it whatever? I can't put my finger on it, because that whole equation is way too big. I would need like a team of scientists, and they would have to have contact with people all over the country. But the one thing we can surmise is there's a 3-day bite cycle going on with especially blue cats. We all know.
Just off of a gut feeling, what would you think the reasoning would be?
Well,
just off of a gut feeling.
Scientifically, I can't guess, because there isn't any science at this point that I would feel comfortable talking about, and because I could possibly lead people down the wrong road. But my personal opinion would be that their digestive cycle is longer than what people think, and I have some evidence for that. The evidence is that you could feed them in a tank in an artificial situation, and they're all bloated up, and maybe some of them puke and maybe whatever, and it usually takes them 2 or 3 days to become really active. So whatever forces of the universe decides to turn all the fish on or all the fish off, that we don't know. But whatever forces that,
they don't all turn off.
No, they don't. I'm just saying like maybe half of them or the majority. There's always going to be, just like we said before, there's no absolutes in fishing.
The longer you've done it, aren't you able to iron out some of those where
You
Yes,
talk to
yes.
other anglers
Yes,
at the ramp, and they're all like, "We got
yes.
skunked," and they're like, "How'd you do?" And
Yes.
like, I don't even want to tell them how we did because now I'm gonna make them feel bad.
Yes, but and that isn't when you got to hide behind a tree to bait your hook. I'm just talking an average type bite. Okay. One thing I know is that if I decide, let's just say I want to go fishing in August, what I don't want to see is I don't want to see a major rain rise in the water 2 or 3 feet in a fast situation. I don't want to see that. I want to see it fairly stable. Even if the water, rises or falls maybe a foot or two, I don't want to see a 3-foot rise, and I don't want to see a 2-foot drop. I want to see it fairly consistent. I want to see weather. I want to see water. I want to see current. Fairly consistent, and I know that's going to be, the odds are, not always, but the odds are it's going to be a pretty good bite. I get excited when I look at last week's water table because I haven't paid attention to it for 2 months, and it looks good. And maybe we got a little bit of a blip, maybe a little bit of a blip down, and it's pretty much like that. I'm excited about it. I rely heavily on the USGS site.
And I tell
Or a
people
natural
sometimes it's like taking that fish out of the water, throwing them in the cooler on ice. It shocks them.
Yeah, and I don't want to see a giant temperature drop. I want to see
Yeah.
pretty stable conditions, and that usually leads to a pretty good bite, where I could risk $400 or $500 and 400 miles and a hotel stay and going on the boat. That's just playing the odds.
Yeah.
It's not pulling the slot. The slot is you just go when you can go. But and sometimes I do it, and sometimes it fails miserably, and sometimes it's awesome.
So Tim, I fish when I can, and because I'm gonna fish every week, and I got to fish. It's basically Saturday or Sunday during big fish season, so I got to go. No matter what the weather is, I'm fishing.
Yeah.
If there's a north front hit, I got to figure out how I'm going to catch a giant on a north front day. If it's a west front day, I got to figure out how I'm going to catch some fish on that day.
Absolutely.
And, the majority of guys are like, I ain't even going because we ain't even catch anything. And then at the end of the day, they're like, how'd you do? Well, sometimes you have some epic catfish trips.
Absolutely.
You should have never caught them. And days that nobody else is catching them. Whatever.
But remember this, Chris. If my big fish waters was like an hour from me, I'd be there every single day. I'd go after work. I would probably miss work because it's only an hour from me. An hour is no big deal, but 4 hours, that takes some advanced.
Yeah, that's speeding.
That takes some stuff right there. It's 4 hours there, 4 hours back. I mean, and we don't normally go for just one day. I mean, if I had even a shot at 80 or 90 or 100-pound, blue cats within an hour or even an hour and a half, I wouldn't even be talking to you right now.
Yeah. So, river fishing and lake fishing is much different.
It is.
So, a lot of the stuff that you're saying about big rise in water, we love that. Lake, we're like, I know exactly where I'm going to fish. When I know there's a big flow coming in and the lake's on a major rise, it's a guarantee. It's pretty much where to go. There's a magnet that's
you're going shallow.
Yeah. And if it's 3 or 4 days after the rain and I'm getting up in that muddy, flow where there's been a bunch of crap coming into the fishery.
Hell yeah.
Like, I don't even want to fish gar water. Well, hell, that's where all the big 200-pound gator gar are at.
Yeah.
Eating big carp. I mean, you can see carp. It's exploding all around you, trying to get out, and you're like, well, I know those are being predated. And for me, what do you think's eating an injured carp?
Catfish are, alligator gar are.
Some of my best fish have come out of that scenario, right?
And absolutely.
I just leave that, Chris. What are you doing up there? I'm hunting for fish of the year. So
as you notice, I almost every time moniker my statements by saying river or Mississippi River or whatever, because once you get into a lake, I'm not saying you can throw out what I'm saying out the window, but it becomes more important to know your lake situation versus a river situation.
Yeah.
And I have never claimed to be a lake guy. Never
And-
claimed to tell everybody I know. Matter of fact, I a lot of times will like if somebody asks me a question about lake, I'll try to answer it as best I can, but I'll like refer them to other people that are big fish lake guys like you.
And Tim, like myself, I grew up on a river. That's
Yeah.
always been my thing is a river.
Yep.
Now we fish a lot of tournaments on Santee Cooper. Now when we go to there, I'm gonna be honest with you, it kicks my a lot because trying to understand that and put what I think is right from the river, it's totally different on that lake. It really is. Even though you got structure, you got the same exact kind of layouts, you've got to know that lake, is just a lot of different layout is in the bottom of it.
Well, and you have to understand the movement for the time of year. Because if you don't understand the movement for the conditions, you're more than likely going to zig when you should have zagged. And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Santee Cooper, I fished it once, and I understood the the complexity of that system, especially since you've got some flow coming in, you got two different lakes, you got some neck downs, you got one lake shallow, you got one lake deep, one's primarily a flathead one, the other is primarily a blue cat one. And so I took a look at that situation and said, it'd probably take me a year or so to get this dialed in to where I could understand how that migration was. Maybe it'd take me 2 years because you can take a look at it and say, all right, I see some flow coming in. I know you got eelgrass to deal with, you got this to deal with, and all that. And so, what's your best scenario? I mean, are you going to drift? Are you going to drag? Are you going to anchor? And it's going to vary depending on time of year and what you're doing and what you're going after. No doubt.
That's it. And
Let's
like
say
now
you're looking for fish, Tim, and everything is right. Okay. And I know you're looking for the actual fish on the graph. When you find the right scenario and you come off plane and all of a sudden your graph lights up, and is there a scenario where you're like, I don't even need to look. This is it. Let's fish it.
No. And I'll tell you why. Because of the style that I fish, because we do have such heavy current, you can be off a fish 3 feet and never contact them. Okay. Because our fish don't generally move in circles like they do in slower water. Usually they'll vary, but they'll travel current vein. So I need to make sure that my baits are ahead of them, but yet they can smell it. And so I'm trying every single time to actually pinpoint every fish that I saw on that graph. And what makes it difficult is if they're moving. So I've only got a 20-second viewpoint of these fish when I like come down and I looked at them and I turn around and I mark them again. So I'm very methodical about that. I will, if I'm going downstream and I mark them, I will turn immediately and I will look at them again, and then I'll look at them in cross sections like this. Because if they've already moved from where I saw them before, I know, and especially if I mark them like flat and they're like a foot or two off the bottom, I can't predict that I'll have time to anchor and I'll have time to
a lot of times they're
so I'm
spooking
gonna look.
the boat, right? I mean,
What's that?
If you go over them and you're a little too close, you're spooking them with the boat.
Usually not in the Mississippi because there's so much boat traffic and it's so dirty and they're so used to it, and there's barges going in and out and throwing wakes and all this other stuff. It's not like a serene, like
in a lake. If
you're right.
Go over them, you better
they'll
make sure they're still there.
They will.
85% of the time, big fish will move.
Yeah.
If you're anywhere close to them.
I can literally hover over them in 25 or 40 foot of water and they don't move. Only those times when they're actually moving. So if they're actually moving, I already knew because I went and I triangulate and they're gone. They're up here. And if they're 5 feet up here or 10 feet back there, I know that I can't hinge because there's not a lot of them. There's not a lot of 4 foot fish where I fish.
Yeah.
You might go all day and not even mark a 4-foot fish. You might not mark 20 catfish in a whole day. It's not that huge of a population that a lot of people think it is. They think that, oh, there's catfish everywhere. Well, there's not. Especially the time of year I target giants. So the time of year I target giants, I'm looking for 3 fish. Maybe I'll catch 10, but I'm looking for 2 to 3 fish that I'm trying to triangulate. I'm trying to anchor up above, which I got to have 150-foot of anchor rope out and go back, and then still keep my eye on the prize and still get those baits in front of those fish. Or I'm going to have to choose a different situation where I would be hoping that the fish that I mark down there are going to come up, and I'm going to ambush them in a neck down. Not a neck down in the river, because the river's a mile wide. It's a neck down in the current. So one current's going this way. They've got that travel zone, and so wow, I got to really work on this thing.
And Tim, something that I've had to do several times, and you're talking about the anchors, a while ago about being, just 3 feet off or something. I've had sometimes to, in order to get on top of some of the fish that I was targeting when I first moved there, if first time I throw out, it might not be working, but I'll take that anchor rope and adjust it, maybe let 10 foot out, 20 foot out, and put it right on top of them. There's a lot of time that a lot of people might not understand. Hey, maybe I just need to let that anchor rope out 15, 20 foot. That's going to put you right where you need to be.
Absolutely. And you know what? I leave that in my videos. I'll say, Sean, 40 feet. Because I've first triangulated them. I'm trying to get it ahead of them enough, but I already know because it's already been past that 15-minute window, and I'm not contacting the right fish. So I like, Sean, let's get 40 feet of anchor rope out, and then I'll redistribute the big giant clunky baits, with the giant, huge sinkers on it and the huge hooks, and pretty soon here comes the 50, here comes the 70, here comes the 90. Yeah.
It's just that simple little movement of that anchor rope can mean a lot.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, if I go into a situation where the current's a little bit squirrely, and I'm a boat width or whatever over, Sean already knows. Well, thank God that he pulls it, because it's like a 40-pound anchor. 100 feet down, 40 up. That's like pulling 40 pounds up the side of a 4-story building. I mean, come on. But Sean will do it. I'm like, Sean, we got to move. And I'll move the boat over 8 feet because I just know I can't triangulate to hit those. Maybe we mark 3 fish. One's 30 feet that way. Another one's 40 yards that way, and the other one's on that lip of that main channel. But I want to hit them all at once. I'm not going to try, especially for blues, because they move so much. With flatheads, I'm not too worried about it. I can target one fish, move, target another fish, move, target another fish. But with blues, you want to try to get as many baits into their face, as many fish, because the odds are they're gonna go this way, they're gonna go that way. They might come up, they might miss your baits altogether. Sean and I set up a live show where we marked some giants. I mean, a bunch of giants, and they were all belly to the bottom. They look like 55-gallon drums, dot matrix right on the thing. And we could not get them to go during the day. And I'm telling you, we put baits in front of their face. They would just sat there, whatever. So we moved 100 yards up to where the current neck down, and there was a tip of a wing dike, blah, blah, blah. And so we've got the fish finder on still. It gets almost dark, and here comes what I describe as freaking, I mean, these things were school buses. They were moving slow, so that they appear really long on your thing, on your fish finder, but they're like that tall, and they're like hard red with a little bit of yellow and blue on the outside, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's a school bus coming up. And most of them missed our baits. I'm telling you, most of them did. We ended up landing like a 70 and 85 and like a low or a high 80s or a low 90s. But still, there was 5 or 6 fish that didn't even get our bait. They just got up and went right underneath the boat and just went right past, even though we had great baits on, because they had a purpose. They weren't searching around. They were just moving. And luckily, 2 of those fish came on a down rod, which a down rod is you basically take a big donkey weight like this, and you tie a note. Ooh, geez, I about hurt my coffee table. You take a no-knot snell with about 4 foot of tag line, and that's what I tied to this right here, like this little. And you know what this is right there? That is that's electrical wire that I've stripped off of, and you twist it and you leave like a little anchor thing when you pour it in there. But anyways, that goes straight down because you can't. I mean, you can't take 12 ounces and throw it behind the boat, just right behind the boat. It'll raise up off the bottom with 50-pound test. And so we have to put this straight down. And so it's basically, this is an inline right here. This goes to a swivel, and then it's the tag line that is connected. So I can literally set that. I can either, reel it up tight, and it's 4 foot up. If I notice that they're 3 foot up, I can let a little out, and it will bow back. This whole thing will go from straight to bowing back, and now I'm at 3 foot. It's like a giant. It's like the biggest, dumbest drop shot rig you ever saw.
Man,
it's ridiculous, and it might have a. And we put baits on it like the size of that sometimes. Most of the time we don't. Most of the time we, it's a respectable bait. Maybe it's 2.5 inches around and like that. If the current's too rough, but if the current's, the lower the current, the bigger the bait I'm gonna use.
Catfish Junkie has a question. Says I caught really dark blue in one spot, and some almost rainbow colored in another spot. Do you think those rainbow colored ones are gay?
No, but they are the rainbow colored ones are usually what I would call juveniles. The ones that show up really iridescent and all that stuff, they might be 20, 25, 30 pounds. They're absolutely beautiful, but they're not old. I almost never catch a giant that is that colored, but I've caught many of them that are almost the color of a freshwater dolphin. They're damn near pink. They're bluish. They got pink. They got iridescent. They're 20, 30 pounds. Beautiful fish, but I almost never catch an 80 like that.
I can tell you a lot. The color, a lot of it is genetics, but quite a bit of it is also where they've been with the sunlight.
Mm-hmm. How deep they're running. Yeah,
we're catching big fish shallow, and they've been up shallow for a few days. Some of them are almost black.
Yep.
And when we're catching them real deep in the winter, they look pink or albino even.
All right, so Chris, guess how many black ones we catch on the Mississippi?
We don't catch a lot here, but I've caught one that I know that was genetically different, rather shallow water.
I'm just saying with a suntan, the really dark ones. Yeah. We catch almost none because our water's so dark. It hardly ever is clear on the Mississippi. But yet go to any of those rivers on South Carolina, North Carolina. You see those guys catching those fish in those shallower, clear waters, and they're dark. The same thing happened in the clear California waters. They were just magnificently. Almost the color of this phone. Pretty crazy.
We catch quite a bit of dark ones here in South Carolina.
My son caught an 80 last year. Is the biggest blue cat ever caught in the state of Texas by a youth angler. When he pulled it out of the water, it was in the red water. It was light colored. Yep. It took us 15 minutes to get everything weighed and take all our pictures and all that. By the time the 15 minutes was up, it was black. It was black.
That's interesting.
Black looking. So the first picture we took, it was whitish pink looking. But 15 minutes later, that thing was black, is like crazy, beautiful looking.
So I had a 250-gallon aquarium that I brought about a 15-pound blue, because I think they're awesome, home from a fishing trip, and he was snow white with the lights on. It still took about 3 days, but with the UV lights on, he went pretty darn dark within 3 days. And that's just one example. I got a lot of examples with bringing home channel cats are the same way. They have melanin in their skin too. It just is what it is. It works out really cool because that if fish have been staying deep and you catch them shallow and they're still white, they just got there.
Yeah.
If they're dark, they've been there a while. 3 days, 2.5 days. Pretty cool stuff.
That's it. Quick question: you ever call it albino, Tim?
Albino blue?
Yes.
Yes. Albino channel cat, yes. Never an albino flathead yet. Out of all the hundreds, maybe thousands of flatheads, I've never caught an albino. I've caught canary yellows. I've caught stuff that looked really, but I've never caught like a pure white with red eyes. But I have caught several albino blues. Never giants. I wish I would catch like a 50 or a 60 that was an albino. Yeah. I haven't. Yeah. They're usually 15, 20 pounds, 25, 30 at the most. Oh my gosh. This thing's terrible.
I almost reached up for my phone. I thought that was my phone.
Yeah. Well, little malfunctioning going on here.
Now, Tim, another question from earlier. Yeah. Wind direction. How much will that affect the bite?
On a river?
In a river,
the kiss of death is a 10 to 15 or above wind straight up river. It's almost always the kiss of death. It's freaking horrible for some reason, and I can't completely quantify it. But if my guess would be, it just slows the current down for some stupid reason. And I've tried and tried and tried and tried, and I've caught a few big fish, but I've never had a great day, or even a mediocre to good day on a hard wind up river. Now, if I can avoid that, and here's the thing. It's not that I can't position well, because I can. It's not that I can't put baits out or mark fish, because I can. But if I can go from an east-west, which I do fish in east-west part of the Mississippi at Rock Island, I'll skip. If we got whitecaps coming up through the east-west and I go but to the north-south, I can actually clean up a decent day of fishing.
Nice. Because, I mean, that right now. That plays in hand, even, a lot of places on the rivers and stuff, just know where you're going to be able to go to be able to catch those fish out of that wind or a little bit slower wind.
Yeah. Are you finding the same situation on the rivers that you fish when directly upriver, it just messes the bite up somehow?
That's it. Yeah. I mean, it really does. 15 and up is, just.
Yeah. You can get by with 10. You get by with 5, especially, whatever. But yeah.
Once you hit that 15 and up mark, it just cuts it off solid until you basically have to move, and you might have to jump to a different pool to, us. We can go from one to another one without leaving the same one, just using the boat, and it's totally different.
Here is an example of that very situation. I don't know, 2008 or 2009, I had some clients that came in from, believe it or not, they worked at Caterpillar. They came into the airport there at the Quad Cities. I took them to the Quad Cities. We caught 4 flatheads. Biggest one was 52. Smallest one was about 20. And we actually caught a 40 or so, and that was all before 10 o'clock in the morning. Here comes the wind. We didn't catch another fish all day. We couldn't even get a flathead to bite, because we got 15-mile-an-hour winds, even though I could kind of get out of the wind and whatever. So the next day, my next clients came, and the wind was still like that. Jumped the pool where it wasn't as bad, not so bad. I mean, that's just one example, let alone, all the years.
Tim, Skip asked, when you're hunting flatheads during the day, are you marking the actual fish?
Not usually.
Structure and current conditions, etc.
Yes. I'm basically targeting known big fish, flathead type habitat, and I don't mark the fish normally. If I mark flatheads, I'm excited because they're up and moving. And look out! I mean, if you got a 4-foot flathead coming out and nosing into a drop or something like that, and you put a rod down and it goes, and you mark them like sitting away from the current. Sorry, not the current, but the cover, and you mark them where it's like towards the drop, and you're marking like things on the bottom like this. I'm like, oh, look out, because they've just done come out. And if they've done come out, then I can just basically throw baits right in front of their face. Look out. Those are the days I catch 25 flatheads in a day, when they're out and moving. And it sounds ridiculous, but I've done it many, many times where it's 20 to 25. Matter of fact, I did a whole weekend one time where the flatheads were just kind of running amok for some stupid reason. They were in basin holes. They were like the side of bridge abutments. They weren't even tucked into the stuff. And we ended up catching like 50 some flatheads. I had a guy, a buddy of mine from Jacksonville, Florida, come up here. And he flew in, picked him up from the airport. This is another one of those. And I remembered like 20 some flatheads a day. He's like, Tim, and he keeps like records. Last time I was talking, he's like, no, we caught like 61 flatheads in 2 days.
And what was the reason you think that was happening?
A little bit more high water, and it was the right situation in the early pre-spawn. When they were they hadn't spread out yet. I mean, it's kind of like holding your mouth right. Yeah. It's kind of like everything aligns and all of a sudden, because it doesn't happen very often. I mean, but when it does, you know it. You know, when you move into an area and you see like 5 bumps in an area that's 13 foot of water that you never see bumps, you know, just like sitting there, and you're like, oh boy, we got 5 flatheads sitting on this little shelf, or we got 15 flatheads, you know, sitting in this basin hole.
What was your weather pattern during that time? What kind of weather were you having?
We had a little bit of high water earlier, but it was all stable after that. I believe it was like May 17th or 18th, which is right before the flatheads spread out and do their major pre-spawn thing. They weren't in wintering areas. They had moved out of their wintering areas and they were starting to stage, and we just caught it just right.
Nice. Heck yeah. Because that's very interesting that you're saying that, is because, you know, sometimes those days seem to be rare.
They are rare. They are rare. And I could count them on probably 2 hands in 30 years.
Yeah. What was that?
Catfish Junkie says, I catch fish with bait in the water, some days more than others. I don't know the science, but bait in the water matters.
You know, and
you gotta have the bait in front of the right fish, though, Junkie.
Yep,
so,
you do.
You know, just because you got bait in the water, that's sometimes.
What was his name again?
Catfish
Junkie. Catfish what?
Catfish Junkie.
Okay, Catfish Junkie. I would have to follow that up with, I've never caught a catfish without bait in the water. So there's my science for it.
Oh man,
I've been out there fishing all day with big fish right under the boat, and they wouldn't bite. I've been reeling up with looking down as I'm reeling up, and a big fish just come right next to the boat, and it's like,
yeah. And
I don't get that. I don't understand that, but
there has been days, and plenty of them, that you mark big fish in their correct location and whatever, and you just can't buy a bite. And it's not your bait. It's not anything. It's just they're just looking at, especially with flatheads. I mean, more than blues. I can literally, well, I would say that, but I've had probably just as many days with giant blues that, you know, you mark them and they're just sitting, they're just hovering 2 foot off the bottom, and you can't get them to bite. They ain't biting. They might not bite for 2 days. Flatheads the same way. You know, I mean, you can literally put it on their face and they won't, you know. I was talking about my aquariums, and I could starve a flathead for 7 days, not feed them a damn thing, nothing. And get everybody excited that it was over. Maybe we were, you know, had a get together or whatever. I'm like, okay, we're going to throw some shad in there like this big. It's flathead candy, blah, blah, blah. Throw 25 shad in there, and they swim all over their lips for 2 days. And then one night, all 25 shad are gone because 3 flatheads gorged on them so hard. But yet they let them swim all over their face for 2 days. So, you know, riddle me that.
You know, that's that hunting instinct that probably kicks in. You know, like getting them used to you and just
There's some forces at work that we will probably never understand. We can just guess and present our baits as much as we can, and just hope to shit freaking giant bites that. But there are things we can do to increase the odds, and you know, some people have proven that over a lifetime. You know,
yeah. I was doing a live stream one winter, it's probably 2 years ago. You came in the live stream and we weren't catching shit. And everybody was like, downsize your baits, downsize your baits. And I said, I think I'm going to actually go bigger. And you're like, okay.
There it is.
So I went bigger. I slowed down, and we started. And I told Tim,
yep.
And we're on a bunch of 50s. And you're like, oh, I like hearing that. I'm like,
yep.
I'm gonna go big. I'm gonna go bigger.
Yeah.
And we went big, and all of a sudden we started hammering giants. And so
that's right. And bigger isn't always the answer.
No,
but I'm telling you, I've never been disappointed by going bigger. I have never been disappointed by it, even if we don't catch anything.
On, but I went big because I the guys like, oh, the fish are lethargic. They want something tiny. I'm like, I'm gonna go with something bigger because they're lethargic. Like
Chris, how did
you actually? To me, it's like, okay, he's moving slow.
Sometimes the right thing is to downsize, but if you're dealing with a massive amount of fish and you're not having a bunch of success, downsizing is not really the way to go. You go bigger or go home.
I went big. It paid off big.
Yeah, I remember that live show.
How did you come up with that solution? I mean, what made you go to that point, being new to the game? Saying, okay, why would you go to that point instead of downsizing? What was your mindset on that, Chris?
Well, here's one thing I've noticed. I've heard so many guys say, as the colder the water gets, you start downsizing. And I get it. Once it really goes into like 37 degrees, I understand that part of it. But, for me, giant fish, as they become lethargic, they don't want to eat 20 times a day. They would rather eat one easy meal and be done. And so in my mind, is this big fat fish down here just wants one big bait. He's letting all my small stuff go by. Let's see what he wants when I put something worth his while in front of his face. And as soon as I did that, this game on. I mean, we started just smoking big fish.
I remember your scenario, though, and if you remember your scenario, you were marking big fish in 25, 30 foot of water that wouldn't go. And then you said, okay, these fish are being inactive. I'm going to hit those shallows, and I'm going to come up this ledge and start throwing into this area that's probably 2 to 3 degrees warmer. So what you effectively did was you went from fish that were neutral to negative to positive feeding fish, and you gave them big stuff so that the little fish wouldn't take it away from them first, or they wouldn't be bothered by it.
Right.
To me, that's how I conceptualized that. Hold on.
Because I'm going to tell you, for you to come up with that, man, like a lot of people wouldn't think of things like that. They were just...
Jamie, sometimes you can't go with what everybody else is telling you. Because now, if what they were doing was consistently working for them, I might say, okay, I might try that. But a lot of what guys are going off of is not experience, is what somebody else told them. So I'm more of the type of guy who likes to figure things out for myself. I know that my big fish production has skyrocketed when I got away from the smaller baits. I have caught giants on small baits, but the sheer number that I've been catching since going big, it is not even close. So guys can say all they want about big, elephants love peanuts. Y'all keep doing your thing, and we'll be over here freaking breaking records. That's all I got. I mean, big fish want something big majority of the time. Sometimes not the case, but.
And like you were saying earlier, man, you might not catch as many big fish by doing that, but when you do, man, you're going to catch some nice fish by doing it, and it's going to make it well worth it.
Here's a good example. So when you go big, when I used to go small and I didn't put a whole lot of big baits out, I'd put out 1 or 2.
I'm cooking meat for my son's graduation. I'm going to go check it. Y'all keep talking because I think this is a great conversation. I want to get in on it.
So when I would go small, we would catch maybe one big fish for the season, right? And I'm fishing this pretty much the same water. I've got a lot more knowledge under my belt now, but fishing pretty much the same water. Now, fast forward to today. In our big fish season, I'm catching a monster almost every trip now. And it's a lot of it's because I'm giving them what they want. Yeah. Big fish want a big bait. Occasionally they'll eat something small, but a tiny fish eats a small bait. And you'll notice as they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, so does their prey. And eventually a giant is eating a carp, a 6-8 pound carp. So
you know, like here on the river, man, I tell people, say, man, what size bait are you using? I'm showing them a bluegill that you could lay across your two hands, live bluegill. That's because I'm after a big flathead. Yes, you will sometimes catch a smaller flathead, but that tries to eliminate a lot of that. You're trying to throw them smaller ones to the side. So when I'm going for big flatheads, I want big bait, like you were saying. And, you know, I don't want to have to mess with the smaller ones, but
yeah, you also use the big baits to filter out the smaller fish.
That's it.
Just like Catfish Junkie said, you ain't catching fish if you don't have bait in the water. And small fish are more aggressive. So while you're over there messing with this 10, 15 pounder, your bait's not in the water for 15 minutes. And you might have missed the 80, the 70, the 60. And, you know, given
spot on. I know a lot of people say lakes and rivers are different, but when you use bigger baits, it don't matter if it's a river or a lake. That's the same for both of them. You know, that's where they are the same as far as using bigger baits and stuff like that.
When I first met Tim, I said, "Oh, he goes big like me." That's something that I can really relate to because most guys don't go big like that. When they say big, it's not really that big.
Yep.
And for me, my smaller baits are a lot of guys' big bait. And for me, my smallest bait will catch an 18 pounder. You know, and that's a big bait. I mean, that's a pretty big bait that'll catch an 18 pounder. But my big baits are, you know, like a loaf of bread.
Yes. You know, I went to CatCon and I used loaves of French bread to mimic my baits.
Yeah, that's not the size of a big bait. Do you just single hook them or do you?
Yes, I always single hook them because I don't want a nipper on the back end. And I really think, according to physics, the hook point of something like this, if it's distributed double, it's the same thing like I never liked treble hooks for catfish because you got 3 hook points, dissipating the power of one. And so maybe I'm overthinking it. I mean, everybody's got their opinion, but I want to hook this big so that I can hook the nose of a carp or a giant sucker that's 24 inches long and cut him 12 inches. But and let's talk about big baits. It's not.
Yeah,
it's not.
Haven't you noticed, like when you present a big bait and you're trying to present it, presentation is everything. A bit like you said, most fish are not dead floating around in the lake or the river.
Right.
You're trying to present it as a fish that's maybe injured, dying in its last woes of life.
Yep. I still want electrical signals. That's why I keep all my baits alive if I can, and I cut them right before I throw them.
Fish will do an injury bite. I mean,
oh yeah. They'll do what I call an investigatory bite. That's almost exactly like a shark. Almost exactly like a shark.
I mean, a lot of times a shark will come bite the crap out of something and just kind of kick back and see what it's going to do after that.
Oh, if you've ever had giant, catfish in tanks, it would become very obvious to you. Jeepers. I got to really fix this thing. This thing's terrible. Keeps falling. Yeah, I mean, that is a big thing for catfish.
Yeah.
And real quick, Chris.
Guys are like, that stinger hook you're using, Chris, is that for smaller fish? I'm like, I don't ever catch a small fish on a big bait like this. That's for the injury bite.
You can. Yeah.
If we got no wind, Tim, and you're in a lake, they come up and they just bite the crap out of it. They may let go, but sometimes they just bite it and just kind of sit there and see what it's going to do.
They'll grab half of it. They will grab half of it.
It's sitting in their mouth. And
the one thing that I don't do very much is if I'm after big baits, I don't use smaller cylindrical baits in a long version. Okay, I don't like that. If I don't have really robust baits that are like that big around, I'll literally shorten those baits. It won't be as giant of a bait, but I really don't want a big long bait. So a mouth that's like this big can grab half of it and then move, do a pull down and not get hooked. Now, people say, okay, why don't you use a stinger hook? Well, I'm just going to,
earthquake.
That was an earthquake.
Chris,
there we go. I'm just going to hold it. Well, I can't hold it there.
Chris, while he's getting set up, I saw a question right here. Does the type of bait matter for bigger fish like cut, live bait, or the area you fishing? So does it matter for the area that you're fishing?
I think it does to a point.
Because sometimes a year it's very crucial because they're keying in on certain types of bait.
Yep.
But then certain times a year, they're really, for me, like, if the water's 45 degrees, I think they're actually looking for a size bait that is going to fill,
Ooh, Chris whipping out the big shit right there.
I think that they're going for something that's not a lot of work. They're to me, a big giant blue cat, they're lazy. They want it. They want the easy road. They don't want to have to go eat all day long. They pick a time of day where they eat, and they want to go get something that's real quick and easy. It's like McDonald's double cheeseburger. Pull in through the drive-through, get your cheeseburger, eat it, and go lay down on the couch. And to me, a giant blue cat is very similar in nature to that guy, rather than the 20-pounder who's out just, I'm going to eat. I'm ready to eat. And he's out eating and eating, little baits for 4 hours out of the day.
Giant fish, to me, have time on their side. They don't have to exert. They're the big dog. They don't have to exert. They don't have to chase. They don't have to vie for position, because their very presence actually deters small fish for the most part. Okay, when they get active, they run amok. I mean, I've literally been on the water when they're taking 10-pound Asian carp right off the surface. We've all caught flatheads that are 25 and 30 pounds and have been all the way up into the belly of another flathead, and their grinder marks are on top of their head. The only reason they couldn't swallow them is because their pectoral spine stuck out and they didn't get them head first. We just know that. We know that blue cats can eat something that goes all the way to the bottom of their stomach, and the tail hangs out its mouth for 3 days until it goes down a little farther, until it finally disappears, and they've digested it.
Two years ago, Tim, I saw a 50-pound blue cat floating belly up. And I pulled over there to it. I'm like, damn, that's a big fish. It had a 10-pound largemouth lodged in its mouth, and somehow it killed it.
Well, it should have been able to eat a 10-pound largemouth pretty much with ease. So it must have took it wrong or whatever.
I don't know why, but the largemouth part of it was sticking out, and the blue cat was belly up. I'm like,
now if
I've
y'all
seen that.
if y'all have the guts to, the next 60 or 70 you catch, just put your hand in its mouth, squeeze it right down the gullet, past the grinders. You can reach all the way to the bottom and feel how much room there is. We used to do that years ago because
we have to burp deep fish in the winter.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You can tell when you put your burping tool down in there how big they are.
Right, but I'm saying
a lot of room down in there.
Your hand has no problem. You could probably put two hands, but he would
carry your form. I got a buddy that's 6'8", and he burps by sticking his hand down in
it. Yep, you can, but you're risking a pretty good skin rash doing that. I used to do it when I was younger, but I've already been down that road. Don't need to do it anymore. Flatheads are pretty docile once you fight them and get them in the boat, but let them rest. Then they're pretty on. Oh yeah. Blues will tear you up at any point.
Yeah,
unless you get them over.
I'd say the 30-pound blue is probably the most aggressive out of all the size. I mean, they're mean. They bite you.
They are.
They rip your finger off.
I think you're
a really big one's like, I know you're gonna let me go. Let me just,
Yeah, but put them in a big tank and go try to noodle them out. Holy moly! A 70-pound blue will tear you to pieces. I mean, to pieces.
Nope.
Yeah. When I'm handling big fish, I generally put my gloves on because I like to put my hand in their mouth to hold them.
I do too. I mean, I know. I used to think gloves were for sissies, but I'm all for them these days because I've got like bad hurt by a couple of giant blues because it's not that the bed of nails is the problem. It's the fact that they're long in the tooth and they got 9 teeth. They're like a 1/4 inch longer than the rest.
Yeah.
Especially them really big old fish. You're like,
my hands are permanently scarred from big guys. They're like, man,
I've got them.
There ain't no doubt you catch a lot of big fish. I'm like,
yep.
I'm like, yeah, my hands pretty much stay scarred.
Yeah. Toasty, little toasty.
Oh man.
There's no faking that.
No. All right, brothers. Is there anything else? I'm sure there is. We'll have to do this again. This is, what's
this
better?
Is always a lot of fun. That's for sure.
Talking about nice catfish with great friends. I mean,
man, I tell you,
and all the people that are, back, in the comments and making comments and asking questions. What a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, they all look for you coming on, Tim. I tell you, man, there's been questions and stuff like that, and I tell you. One point that I really wanted to say, man, is you're talking about that longitude and latitude tonight. Yeah. That was something that was totally different that nobody ever heard.
That's a brief overview, but I mean, you can graph it, and it's absolutely true to almost the day, sometimes 3-4 days. That initial pre-spawn movement just doesn't change, and it is what it is. Now. Other things affect it, where you're at, how much weather you're getting, whether it's warmer, it will speed up the spawn or, slow it down. But, they just can't afford to be still stuck in one area and too far away from it. So, I mean, just, it's just the solar, and believe it or not, that's how that's how a lot of animals do. Even some mammals, it's just, based on the solar cycle, but that's not everything. I mean, that's one thing about catfish. They have the longest pre-spawn of any fish.
So that solar deal is just one of the things because
but at least it's
and how I know for certain that is because here in Texas the last 2 years we've had a catfish spawn in the late fall, early winter. And I know because I'm catching them in my net and so daylights are getting shorter, which if you're just going off daylight, they shouldn't be spawning. But we had a 2-month span of the water temperature staying almost the same.
No, and let me reiterate this because sometimes it's really clear. Okay, it is not pre-spawn is not the egg laying motion. Okay, the pre-spawn begins when they go out of their preservatory winter phase, whether it's full winter or whatever, and then they move out of their sedentary winter position or location.
Their spawning ground.
Then they start moving. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about laying the eggs. The eggs can get speeded up pretty quick by higher water temperatures.
It's strange to me that they had eggs, and there was enough time.
Don't forget, there's faux spawn as well. They're going to continue to produce eggs. Whether they lay them or not is anybody's guess, because sometimes they don't. There's a certain percentage of fish that cannot lay their eggs at certain times. Say all the spots are filled and there's no takers. They just don't lay their eggs. They reabsorb them. That's one thing that we've known, as far as science goes, for a long time. And if you don't get the right water, there's not enough habitat, there'll be a lot of them that have either delayed or they just don't get a spawn at all. And then some of them go through the motions but can't complete.
Because we were marking clouds of what I thought were micro shad. I'm like, okay, these are shad. There must have been a shad spawn. So I threw on them. Like,
there are baby blue cats?
Baby blue cats.
Okay. So
by the gazillions, man.
Remember this one.
Last 2 years have been that way.
Blue cats have the longest spawning span of the 3 big catfish. Okay. They're known to spawn all the way up to August or September, especially in warmer climates. And I even see 2 inchers in August and September on the Mississippi as far up as I am. So we do know that, and and some people believe that 20% or 30% will spawn in June. 30-40% will spawn in July, and then there'll be some stragglers that spawn in August, because those fish those little blues that you're talking about, that you can still see through them pretty much, they're not that old. They're only like 3-4 weeks old. And let's talk about this too. There's not a lot of empirical evidence on blue cat spawn. That's why when people ask me, when exactly do blue cat spawn, I'm like, actually, nobody really knows.
Yeah, I mean,
if there's like a hard
times and one. If you've got, our fish start spawning the beginning. They move to close to their spawning habitat beginning of May. So let's say May 1st, our biggest fish move to their spawning areas.
Yep. And you'd be right. Big fish almost always, with flatheads, channel cats, and blues, big fish usually spawn first. And we know this because, like in tributaries that I was talking about earlier, the first ones you see are the big males. They come in. They start setting up their areas to attract big females. The big females come in. They're only in there for about a week. They lay their eggs. The males are stuck there, and the females just go back out. Same thing with flatheads. Probably same thing with blues, except for I have a feeling, and I can't prove it because I didn't do underwater studies on blues and all that stuff, but I believe that they'll spawn in increments throughout a longer period of time.
Yeah, so, they start up by the warmer water, and then I'm dealing with lakes. So as the lake gets warmer towards the deeper water, then some of those fish haven't spawned yet. They've stayed out kind of in that deeper water, and they decide to spawn. But I'm thinking that some of them who spawn early go ahead and do the whole cycle over again.
They might,
and they're still might do a second spawn at the end of June. So they spawned early May
or August. And that wouldn't be unheard of as far as the fish species goes. I've never heard that from a biologist as far as blue cats, but they might not know, because, they rarely study something unless they're paid to do it by some sort of corporation. I mean,
right.
Or, it's got to be a college study by a fish nut psycho like me, blah, blah, blah. I wish I would have lived in blue cat territory to have been able to give you that answer, but I can't.
I'm just going off what I catch in my net.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing, we do keep eaters that time of year to eat. Not a bunch, but we keep some eaters to eat. I'm going off what I'm seeing there. I'm going off bite marks on big fish that we're catching around the spawn. I'm trying to put all that evidence together to understand what's going on.
So, Chris, in our terms, that would be known as anecdotal evidence. So,
Yeah.
and I really, I cite anecdotal evidence all the time. Like even in, my videos or whatever, I'll be like, according to anecdotal evidence mostly, but some sort of supporting information from such and such study or such and such study. So, and it's not that science is always right. I think fishermen have a better idea of the blue cat spawn migration and also the movements than actually the DNR does, because blue cats, being deep water fish, they're difficult. They don't shock them that much. They have to do net studies, and they have to do and there has been some radio telemetry studies and stuff like that, as far as them going all the way up the Missouri River and then going back, but it's still a small sampling. They get 12 fish and they go, oh, they migrate 498 miles in a month or a week. But is that all of them? Heck no, it's not. So we have to use our brain as far as fishing experience, because honestly, I was kind of disappointed when I got out of college and I started talking to DNR guys that were 20 years into it, and I started asking them questions. They didn't know.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you not know this?
They don't.
No. And there's only a handful of them out of 100 that actually
hundreds fish in his net this winter, 3 to 6 inch. So a 3-inch, Ryan, if you're catching a 3-inch in the winter, that's a fall. That's the fall spawn. The 6-inch, that was the spring spawn. So that's kind of basically, if you're catching, let's say February, you're catching a 3-inch blue cat in your net, that thing spawned fall. A 3-inch blue cat's, I know, because I catch
at the earliest, probably August.
At the earliest, but usually 6-inch.
I get it.
Is the fish that you're catching. And
do remember those little fish.
This winter we were
highly dependent on plankton. That's pretty much all they eat. They eat zooplankton, they eat invertebrates and stuff like that until they get probably 6-7 inches, and then they can start eating other things, mollusks, nematodes, all kinds of stuff. They start digging down. They use vegetation. They do all that stuff. But there's a pretty different growth rate on little tiny ones, depending on what time of year that they're born.
Yeah, I can generally tell you when the spawn was by the baby catfish I'm catching in a net.
Yeah. And
because I've been doing it every year for so long,
and that's just common sense.
Fish are hatching in June usually. I can start catching those fish that are hatching, in August. I'm like, okay, that fish just hatched. I know that it's an inch long. And then September it's that long. October it's that long.
Let's talk about something interesting as well. The area that I fish is basically around St. Louis. Okay, so everybody kind of knows where that is. That's about lower 2/3 of Illinois. There's a whole lot of United States below that, and a whole lot of United States east and west of that. But I don't believe that we have a whole lot of spawning going on this far north. And it seems that they don't travel that well in any sort of numbers until the water gets fairly low and stable. When it's, I used to try to surmise in my own mind that they're going to travel up when the water's high, and that's going to be the bulk of the population, just like channel cats and just like flatheads. They go north hard when the water is high. Blues do not seem to do that. Blues seem to migrate down when the water's high and return back when it's normal. Now, that was something I was able to prove myself wrong based on anecdotal evidence plus some telemetry stuff. Wintering, they seem to vacate my area. Probably 80% of the population, they go south and spread out to somewhere. I haven't been able to follow them, but you just won't find them past about Halloween up here in any sort of numbers. Now, can they spread out and go shallow? They certainly can, because I mean, shoot, you'd have to have 1,000 fishermen fishing every weekend to figure that out.
But just going off of a smaller ecosystem like a lake.
Yeah.
That's the way I look because you're in an open river system.
Yes.
Fish are able to travel long ways.
Unimpeded
It's a fish
past St. Louis.
that's able to spawn in warmer water. Why would he travel way up here to this cooler water to spawn when the same thing in the lake? The biggest fish are moving up into where that water gets warm first. He moves up in there and starts doing his thing, or him and her into that. I call it prime spawning areas. And then, it's the smaller ones that are doing it kind of a little bit later.
Yes. Now, one thing I would have to say about that is that in a lake, blues or catfish in general are going to have to deal with their circumstances a lot more than they would in a natural river. They can rely on their instincts way more in a natural river than they can any sort of learning capacity. And we know channel cats can learn fairly well. Flatheads are terrible at learning. They are a anachronism. They just you can't teach a flathead shit. You can teach a blue and you can teach a channel cat to do certain things based on the Pavlovian dog response. So, surmising that in a lake to survive, they are going to have to take advantage of certain things that they wouldn't necessarily take advantage of in a natural river. So, we kind of know that. So, I don't know that the base equation always lends itself well to lakes as far as the difference between a lake and a river, because there's going to be certain situations, especially in Texas, it's way different than what it is in the whole Mississippi River Valley.
Yeah.
So as long as we take note of that, then we can be better anglers.
Nice.
Yeah, I see a lot of guys that come from all over the country. Like, for instance, we had the Cat Masters tournament.
Yeah.
This first really major money tournament in catfishing. It's like 50 grand for the first place with a Sea Arc boat. And I mean, just all this huge amount of money on the line.
Yeah.
So every major catfish dude in the country came here. And they found out that Texas ain't easy to fish. They thought, you can't take what you know from somewhere else and bring it to the lake here.
You can to an extent, but anytime you fish a lake versus a river, you are at the mercy, and this is my opinion, you are at the mercy of the home waters guys, because they know where to go, they know what time to go there, and they know what to do. I mean, and a lot of people have said, hey, Epic, can you be my tournament partner on such and such lake? I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I might get a little closer, but we're going to get our asses handed to us to 10 local guys that have been fishing it for 20 years.
Here's one thing I've found from guys that are really good at lakes.
Yeah.
If you're good at one lake, you can generally go to the next lake and do well.
Same thing with
rivers. It's
rivers.
not a matter of fishing a spot or a hole, a certain area. It's understanding the entire picture of seasonal migration, the bait migration, the fish migration, the weather pattern, and then putting all that together
and presentation
into the algorithm, and then you just know where to go.
Yes.
It's just there's in a lake, I believe they use every inch of a lake.
I think so too. And I think they don't visit much of a river. I believe
I think that's the major difference.
Inhabit
a lake, they can
15%.
be anywhere in the lake. Even in the area you think they shouldn't be, they can be there in big numbers.
And that's what Chris earlier talking about, coming from the river and fishing, down like Santee Cooper, that kicks my butt a lot. Trying to understand that to the river is just totally different. I can go to the river and I can catch fish. I mean, certain times I know where to go, how to do it, where to be.
Yeah.
And
I hear
things
a lot
like
of
that.
guys in the river say they fish the hole and they don't want to give up their spots. And I'm like, that's not how we fish in the lake.
Yeah.
We don't have spots. We got to go to where the fish are. If you think you're going to go fish the spot, you may stumble onto them in that spot one trip out of 10. just not.
And I agree. And I would like to add this: if I wanted to jump into tournaments again, I fished rivers all my life. I mean, I fished a lot of lakes too back in the day, but if it was just lake tournaments, I'd be like, oh boy, I got a learning curve. I'd be very comfortable going into tournaments on a river anywhere that catfish swim. It wouldn't matter if it's South America or here or Italy. I'd be very comfortable with that. But on a lake, I'd be like, boy, I better start fishing some lakes, because
that's a lot of phone calls. That's phone calls talking to some people that fishes that thing a lot more. Trying to say, hey man, what do you think? What about this area? It takes things like that. So when I go from the river to the lake, that's what I'm doing. First thing I'm doing, hey man, how's it going?
What's the bait doing? Where are the fish?
Yeah, that's it.
You kind of understand where they've been. Okay, now you see the weather pattern that's coming. If you've got enough data from over the years, you can kind of understand, okay, I know where they've been. This weather pattern's coming. By the time I come,
and where are they going to be next?
I can decide where I think they're going to be going from where they've been.
That's it. I mean, a lot of guys ain't going to tell you exactly where, but, they can get you in the vicinity, and then you can do the rest. I mean, just going off your knowledge of what you know and stuff.
A lot of lakes, all I need is the depth.
That's it.
If I'm travel fishing, a lot of times all I need is the depth. Just tell me the depth where they've been, and I can decide with what weather pattern's coming, where I'm going to go look and build my game plan. I feel like I can be successful that way. It works for me.
And let me say this: if I was to have to fish a tournament, not that I would, but if I had to, and I had to fish a big lake that I was unfamiliar with, I would want to look at no less than 20 points in that lake. I would want to look at where the water comes in. I want to look at where the water goes out. I want to look at the deepest. I want to look at the main channel. I want to look at the arms. I want to look at the creeks. I want to look at all that stuff before I even. I mean, that's pretty huge. And I may not even throw a bait. I just want to know where the activity level is hanging out, and then I want to see where I can narrow down the biggest fish based on what I'm seeing.
That's how I fish.
That's
exactly how I fish. I travel fish a lot, so I mean, it's a constant change of lakes for me. It's guys like, man, it must. You just go to the best lakes. I'm like, yeah, let's see you go try it. Let's see how well you do switching lakes all the time. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing.
Right. And you see the top 10 lake guys always finishing in the top 10, 15, and no matter where they travel, because they're very used to quickly finding a pattern and going based on what's going on. Now, not always, but generally speaking, river guys, you might see a situation where blue cat guys are forced in their tournament thing to go fish a channel cat river, and they hate it. They absolutely cannot stand it. I've heard them cuss channel cats up and down, sideways. They don't want to fish a channel cat river. And see, I grew up fishing channel cat rivers that are slower, subtle, blah, blah, blah. It's almost like a lake. And so you're like, I fully understand what you guys are saying.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys that fish the lake. That there's two ways to do it. And there's the old school way where we would go set up on ambush structure where we think fish are going to come through. But then there's a new school way where I had to throw all that crap out. Now, I will go back to that if what I'm doing is not working. But the new way that I learned is the 90-10 method, where you're fishing 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water.
Absolutely.
You're looking for the 10% of the water. Once you find the 10% of the water, then you break that area down looking for the biggest fish in that 10%.
That's right.
So, and I guarantee you, when I went from doing it the old way, we had success. But when I went to the new school way of the 90-10 method, my production went out the roof, where it's almost like, now that I understand where the 90% are most of the year, I don't have bad trips. It's very rare that I have a bad trip.
Yeah. And it's very rare that I do, but I still get them.
Hey, it happens. That's why it's called fishing.
That's right.
That's it. That's it.
And I try to stress that to, when I talk with people, because, if you're on social media, you're mostly showing your successes, even though I will still put out a video or leave a live up that was just miserable, because people need to know.
I think a lot of people like the reality of it, Tim. They're like, okay, Tim's real.
Yeah.
And I don't like watching it.
He's showing the good
and that's what when we do a live on the TikTok, I'm gonna look at people and say, look here, this is gonna be tough tonight. This is probably the reason why we might not even catch nothing. But I'm gonna be real with you. Or we're gonna come up here, everything's right. This is what I think, and tear them up. So I mean,
when you're out there and you got all these people watching, because Tim, you've been on a bunch of. I haven't live streamed much this past year, but the year before we were live streamed every trip, and we'd be out there getting our ass kicked, and I would grind my ass off. And grind until I figured something out. And I don't think I had one really bad trip, because over just that entire live stream, eventually I would figure something out enough to have success.
You know what I call that, Chris? I call that listening to the fish. Because if you always fish the way you want to, you're going to strike out a lot more than listening to the fish. And every anchor is an experiment. And that's what I try to tell everybody that goes fishing with me. I said, you know what? The first anchor aren't always going to be, but every once in a while, you pick it right. You look around, you find the fish, you throw it in his face, and here comes an 80. Boom. First, and sometimes that can be terrible on a trip, because you could just put it together right at the last minute, and then all of a sudden they get up and move, and all of a sudden you're scrambling again. So you got to listen to the fish, how they're biting, what they're paying attention to, where you're marking them, how they're positioned, up or down, blah, blah, blah. And I want to say this one too. I run into a lot of guys that are like, how do you know how big these fish are? I tell you, I can tell you exactly how. One, I have experience with them. I know, according to how I've moved over it, how deep the water is, it's kind of like a formula. They're going to either appear short and fat, or they're going to be long and kind of fat, almost never skinny like this.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that, and I'm trying to figure out how to say this, but it is knowing your speed on how you moved over that fish is going to affect on almost every single. I mean, I don't care if you got the fanciest stuff. I don't know about the new stuff. What do they got, that thing that looks at them in real time? I don't know about.
I don't have that, but I do have that image, Tim. And I think if you got your graph adjusted and you've got as much experience as everybody in here, then you know what the fish weighs. I've had,
but here's my
guys where I'll say, okay, that's a 48 count. Looks like a 45. Yep. He's 57 feet up to the side of the boat, and then bang, it goes down, and James like, look, Elgato's over here calling his fish.
But remember this one: if you're moving up on and you got your sensitivity 20% or 25, and it doesn't matter which fish finder you got, turn it down to 2. See if you still mark fish, because you could run into it just a little too fast, a little too slow, and all of a sudden they're looking big, or you got 2 small fish, 2 40s next to each other, like right up next to each other. 40s don't seem to mind being together. 50s occasionally don't, but usually you'll never find a 90 just, right next to another.
I've always said, normally once they get up to a little over 70, they kind of become loners.
Yeah.
But no, we got 2 80s that were together this spring.
Yes, they
One
will.
was a male and one was a female. So I'm thinking they were about to go do their thing.
We know that fish that are big oftentimes hang out together, but I hardly ever mark them where they're like next to each other, giving me this gigantic Loch Ness monster blob. Okay?
No, normally I always say the really big fish kind of move similar to what a wild hog does. They're like
I would guess that too. But think of this: if you
and they
turn
don't
your
like
sensitivity way down, you turn your sensitivity way down. Just say you're marking 50 fish on your screen. Turn that down and they all disappear until you got one fish left or two fish. Those are your giants. If you're still showing something, when you turn your sensitivity to 0 and you're still seeing red in there and you're still seeing whatever, or any fish at all, they're usually pretty darn big. And it doesn't matter if you're in 100 foot of water or you're in 20 foot of water. Now, remember, at 20 foot, they're going to appear bigger than they do at 100 foot. It's all scale perspective. Yeah. But I've been fishing with a lot of guys who are like, they see a screen that looks like the screen you see when you go by it, and it's all arches. Oh, look, we got a bunch of giants here. I'm like, turn your sensitivity down, and every single one of them disappears. You ain't got a fish over 10 pounds.
I use my side image to determine the size more than my 2D, but I'm also not fishing as deep a water as you. Once you get over about 40, 45 feet, that side image becomes almost useless.
And that's kind of why I don't use it, especially since we have Asian carp that run 40, 50, 70, 80, 90 pounds, and are usually hanging off to the side. And so I don't even mess with those. I'm a strict down image guy. 2D most of the time. Use 3D occasionally, and I'll occasionally use
like 40 foot or less. Though you could definitely on side image tell what a scaled fish is versus.
Well, you might have to show me that because I have so little experience with that. I basically turn it on. I set it to the same shit that I used on my Legend 2000 that I had.
Yeah. I used to think carp big fish. I'm like, I'm over here.
But the one thing about an Asian carp is they don't have hard scales. They're soft.
Well,
their skin.
We don't have Asian carp, so we don't have. I've never marked one. I wouldn't know what. To tell you.
If you're bored, just Google Asian carp. These things are ginormous.
Yeah,
I had Asian carp, and sometimes they'll hang out in 30, 40, 50 foot of water. And you're like, what is going on here? You're like, they look like giant catfish. You can't get a single one to bite, and they're moving in a certain way. And it only takes me about 15 minutes. I'm like, holy moly, we're 45 foot of water, and we got Asian carp.
I don't know what an Asian carp looks like, but I do know what regular carp look like. And regular carp move more in a uniform manner, where they're all pointed identical. Whereas when you mark catfish, they're all pointed in a certain direction, but they all are different, oriented slightly different.
Asian carp will do that shallow.
They're all pointed into the wind, but none of them are lined up. And carp up.
Asian carp will, but when they're in 30, 40, 50 foot of water,
that way.
They look a lot like catfish. When they're in 30, 40, 50, they look a lot like catfish because they're filter feeders. And they're doing a whole lot of this.
Side image, so you can't see how the whole group is oriented.
Right.
Gotcha. When you see 30 carp together, they're all pointed that direction. When you see 30 catfish together, they're all like wild hogs. They're all
the problem with Asian carp is there's only a certain few out of that population. Most of them are going to be 5 to 10 pounds. But then you've got 4 or 5 that are giant. They're 4 foot long. Yeah. And they have nearly the silhouette of a blue. So it does make it a little bit difficult, but once you throw baits down there, you're like, geez.
And I've noticed the really big catfish when I'm fishing around like the biomass of where all the fish are kind of using each other to feed, it's synergistics. The whole group is working together to feed, and
that is a lake thing.
To kick back and
that
kind
is definitely a lake thing.
Side and just go in when they want. It's an easy meal. And how do I know they go in when they want? I've had trips where when I'm marking them on side image and I got the camera rolling, I can see these giants on my side image up shallow, and then all of a sudden they'll blow up through a giant pile of baby carp, just explode through them like National Geographic. And
nice.
Holy
Once
crap.
you get that on film, I want to see that shit.
Holy crap. Look at that, man.
And you, like with the lakes, you're seeing that, but on the rivers, the bait, really, it's not nothing like that at all.
No, we have a lot of deep water bait. We do.
Yeah.
And I tell people that all the time. They're like, well, somebody asked me, so when do you know to go shallow? I said, I always go deep. That's just.
Guys ask me the same thing, Tim. I go deep most of the time when there's our bigger game fish are deep. So like sand bass and striper, when they're deep, I go deep. But at a certain time of the year, when there's water flowing into the lake, we move up into that shallow, muddy water that's flowing.
Gotcha.
And there's carp.
And that's another thing you got to deal with. You have a thermocline you got to deal with.
Yeah, the summertime, but that's also like right around when the spawn's ending and all that. So our bite's really screwed up then.
Well, I mean, thermocline. I've dealt with thermoclines before. I'm not a big fan of fishing such slow water. I mean, sometimes you'll get a natural river that has dams, and they slow the current down in summer.
When there's a thermocline, because everything is so spread out.
Yeah,
it's out in open water. They become pelagic, where they're out in 70 feet of water, but they're 30 feet up off the bottom.
Look at Chris whipping out the pelagic. Holy moly. This is awesome.
They become difficult to specifically target big fish. You just got to kind of get lucky.
Yeah.
Until,
I talked about pelagic bait fish once on a television show in Chicago. It was just a local, like kind of a QAD thing. We were talking about Asian carp and, blah, blah, blah. And there was like 3 fisheries biologist people there. They were kind of young. I didn't expect much, but usually you would have thought they would have known exactly what you're talking about. And I said, Asian carp don't seem to be a pelagic fish, as opposed to blah, blah, blah. And I said, most catfishermen actually know the difference between, they're not mistaking an Asian carp for like a shad. They're just not. Yeah. They know. But they were trying to blame Asian carp for getting spread by catfishermen, keeping them alive. And they didn't even know on this show that Asian carp at that size are almost impossible to keep alive. I mean, you got to have a lot of oxygen, blah, blah, blah. So, I was kind of lucky. It just brought me back to that. And I'm like, this is the best we got? These people? They don't even know Asian carp at 6 or 12 inches are hard to keep alive? Come on.
Love it, man. I love it. But
all right, fellas. I'm going to have to get in there and get to that barbecue.
I
got 2 roasters with 20 pounds of chicken and 20 pounds of pork, and getting them all seasoned.
Yeah.
Chris, he ain't helping our diets out, is he?
No. I'm trying to lose weight, Tim.
Yeah, I know. Look, this is for Connor's party. It's not even for me.
Man. Tim, how can people that might not know our audience and stuff, how can they go see your videos? What can they go use?
Just look up. You can just go to Google if you want and just put in Epic Catfish. I'll come up, TikTok and YouTube. It's pretty nice to be able to say that actually. There's enough people that are following me finally. Not so much YouTube. Their algorithm got kind of weird, but I started doing TikTok because I could do informational videos and fun videos. Like when I'm drinking coffee in the morning, I didn't have to put like 3 hours into one or whatever. And I kind of feel bad because I love the YouTube crowd. I really do. I always have. I try to make it to CatCon. I swear next year, if I don't cut another finger, I'm going to make it more than 4 hours.
Well, Tim, I appreciate you.
Fun, man. Anybody that's in the catfishing game, gotta go. You gotta go.
That's it. And I appreciate you coming up on our TikTok show the other night. We had an excellent time.
Dude, that was a good time.
Really did, man. We had an excellent time.
If I have time and you're up there, I'll pop in anytime you want.
Heck yeah, brother. I appreciate you.
Tim,
Chris,
appreciate you, buddy.
Dude, I enjoyed that last video that I was lucky to be part of. And I'm telling you, there were some giants in that thing, and there were some great people, a lot of good interviews. It was fast action. If you all haven't seen that, you should go watch Chris's. I think it's your latest video.
Yeah, and, it is. It's called shoot, what did I call it? What do you love about catfishing?
Yeah.
Why do you fish?
Yeah.
Does it?
Yeah.
It really was, man. A lot of great interviews on that. I watched it and that was
a fun one to make. It was not a fishing video, but we added a bunch of big fish in there. So Tim's got the opening cut.
Well, yeah, you know, and I look at things a little differently than some people do. I got the dark energy a little bit. I got the old Captain Ahab going. And so I was like, holy moly. Yeah, everybody else is like all upbeat and everything. I'm like, oh, I'm driven to catch monsters, and that's all I care about. You know?
No, man, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of us that are like you, Tim. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Maybe it's the same way. I'm the same way. A lot of guys get it. I know it is kind of, it does upset some guys, but you know, that's just, we've been doing this a long time. The longer you do something, the more that requires you to get a little bit of juice out of it. So, you know, I love seeing what you do, man. I think
I'm glad somebody likes it.
I look forward to talking to you a lot, bro. I really do.
Well,
man.
Good deal. And you know what? I'm tickled to talk with you guys. You guys are awesome. I truly love the interest. I love the excitement. I love all that stuff. And you know, I learn stuff from people all the time, whether I'm going to use it or not. Probably I'm just old and, you know, I'm kind of set in my ways, but I love hearing about all the new stuff and going to CatCon and seeing all that stuff and talking to people and all that stuff, you know, and you know, I think I'm just glad Sean talked me into going into social media, because I didn't even know it existed, really. I mean, I
didn't either. You know what? I got in because I wanted to memorialize my son's trips. And I was just like, well, I keep losing this damn phone. And, you know, I'm like, this is some cool stuff we're doing. I'd like to be able to have a copy of it. So it turns out to be cool, because I would have never been friends with both of you guys if it wasn't for it. So,
well, I'm telling you, here's to you guys, because I love it. Thanks.
Appreciate you, Tim.
Appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate
I'll be on anytime I can. If you want me to be up here, we'll talk some serious catfishing.
Yeah, it's always fun. So Tim's one of my favorite guests. Jamie's one of my favorite guys. Guys, appreciate everybody coming in, spending some time with us. We'll be back next Wednesday, every Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Tim, appreciate you, bro.
Appreciate you, bro.
Appreciate you guys.
Love you, man.
I might even make a few TikToks out of some of this stuff. I'll usually do 30-second, you know, whatever.
Yeah,
love it behind it. If there's anything awesome that was said, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, you're gonna have to filter through 2.5 hours of young flapping.
Yeah, that's true. But you know what? I think I could stop just about anywhere and find something pertinent that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we always get into some good stuff.
Oh yeah,
got you on here. So,
all right, everybody,
guys,
cooking
lines. God bless. Azul out.
Later, everybody.